Indonesia dengan ini menyatakan kemerdekaan Indonesia. Hal-hal yang mengenai pemindahan kekuasaan dan lain-lain diselenggarakan dengan cara saksama dan dalam tempo yang sesingkat-singkatnya. Jakarta, 17 Agustus 1945, atas nama bangsa Indonesia, Soekarno, Hatta.
Direktur Jenderal Pelayanan Kesehatan Kementerian Kesehatan Republik Indonesia, Dr. Azhar Jaya, SKM Mars, dan Direktur Jenderal Pencegahan dan Pengendalian Penyakit Kementerian Kesehatan Republik Indonesia, Dr. Maksi Rain Rondonuwu, DHSM Mars, yang kami hormati Direktur Utama Rumah Sakit Pusat Infeksi Sulianti Saroso, Bapak Dr. Alvin Spesialis Paru K, Konsultan MKM, dan yang kami hormati narasumber dan moderator, serta Bapak Ibu peserta webinar yang kami banggakan. Puji syukur kita panjatkan kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa atas rahmat dan karunia-Nya, sehingga kita bisa bergabung di acara yang sangat luar biasa. Pagi hari ini, Kamis 26 Oktober 2023, dalam rangka memperingati Hari Kesehatan Nasional yang ke-59. Bapak dan Ibu peserta webinar yang kami muliakan, Kementerian Kesehatan dan Kesejahteraan Keluarga di India melaporkan ada 6 kasus virus NIPAH terkonfirmasi laboratorium, termasuk 2 kematian di Kerala, India. Data ini dihimpun sejak tanggal 12 sampai 15 September 2023 dan sudah dinyatakan oleh WHO pada 4 Oktober 2023. Rumah Sakit Pusat Infeksi Sulianti Saroso sebagai Center of Excellence penyakit infeksi emerging, tentu intinya ingin berkontribusi dalam program pencegahan, deteksi dini, dan respon cepat terkait penyakit infeksi yang berpotensi wabah ini. Salah satunya maka diwujudkan dalam kegiatan webinar pagi ini dengan tema The Emerging of NIPAH Virus Infection, How to Prevent, Detect, and Respond. Bapak Ibu peserta webinar yang kami hormati, izinkan saya membacakan susunan acara webinar hari ini. Pengantar dari Direktur Utama Rumah Sakit Sulianti Saroso, Bapak Dr. Alvin, spesialis paru konsultan MKM. Kemudian dilanjutkan sambutan oleh kedua Dirjen Kementerian Kesehatan, yaitu Dr. Maxi Rain Rondonuwu, DHSM Mars, selaku Direktur Jenderal Pencegahan dan Pengendalian Penyakit, dan dilanjutkan oleh Dr. Azhar Jaya, SKM Mars, selaku Direktur Jenderal Pelayanan Kesehatan Kementerian Kesehatan Republik Indonesia. Kemudian acara ini dilanjutkan ke acara inti, yaitu penjelasan materi yang terkini, menarik, dan faktual dari narasumber yang sangat kompeten di bidangnya dan yang menjalani kondisi NIPAH virus di negaranya, yang tentunya akan memberikan pencerahan kepada kita semua. Bapak Ibu sekalian, yang nampaknya sudah semangat sejak pagi tadi sudah menunggu di waiting room untuk bisa masuk ke dalam webinar ini. Mari kita buka acara ini dengan mengundang yang terhormat Bapak Dr. Alvin Kosasi, spesialis paru konsultan MKM, selaku Direktur Utama Rumah Sakit Pusat Infeksi Sulianti Saroso, untuk menyampaikan pengantar pembukaan acara. Kepada Bapak Direktur Utama, dipersilahkan.
Ya.
Kami persilahkan
Suara saya terdengar
kepada
ya?
Bapak Direktur Utama.
Ya, suara saya terdengar, Dok? Dengar ya?
Suara bisa lebih keras lagi, Dok.
Oh iya, oke.
Suaranya?
Ya.
Ya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang terhormat Dirjen P2P, kemudian Bapak Dirjen Yankes yang diwakili oleh Ibu Direktur PKR, moderator dan narasumber, seluruh panitia, serta seluruh peserta webinar pada pagi hari ini. Puji syukur kita panjatkan kehadirat Allah SWT, karena atas perkenan dan rahmatnya kita bisa berkumpul bersama pada acara webinar pada pagi hari ini. Webinar pada pagi hari ini bertopik The Emergence of NIPAH Virus Detection, How to Prevent, Detect, and Respond, kerjasama antara Rumah Sakit Pusat Infeksi Nasional Sulianti Saroso bekerjasama dengan WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office. Seperti kita ketahui bersama, Rumah Sakit Penyakit Infeksi Profesor Dr. Sulianti Saroso pada tahun 2020 telah ditunjuk sebagai Pusat Infeksi Nasional atau Center of Excellence Penyakit Infeksi, serta mulai pada tahun ini RSPI telah ditunjuk sebagai Koordinator Nasional Pengampuan Penyakit Infeksi Emerging. Dengan demikian, RSPI mempunyai tanggung jawab penuh untuk membantu pemerintah di dalam pelayanan, pendidikan, pelatihan maupun penelitian penyakit infeksi, khususnya penyakit infeksi emerging. Penyakit infeksi emerging yang timbul dapat berupa penyakit baru, new emerging, maupun penyakit lama yang meningkat kembali jumlahnya atau re-emerging. Dalam keadaan seperti ini, ada atau tidak ada penyakit infeksi ini, negara harus siap menghadapinya seperti kasus pandemi COVID-19 yang lalu. Kita ketahui bersama penyakit pandemi COVID-19 alhamdulillah sudah masuk endemi, ya. Namun mulai bermunculan penyakit-penyakit baru yang mesti kita waspadai bersama. RSPI sebagai koordinator tentunya berkomitmen membantu pemerintah, khususnya Kementerian Kesehatan, di dalam penanganan penyakit infeksi emerging ini. Penanganan penyakit infeksi emerging itu didasarkan pada prinsip empat hal, yaitu yang pertama adalah prevent. Prevent itu biasanya melalui surveillance dengan riset klinis. Kedua, detect. Ya, detect itu melalui sistem diagnostik dan deteksi yang berjenjang. Lalu respons. Respon itu melalui tata laksana penyakit, pengobatan serta vaksinasi. Serta terakhir adalah recovery. Recovery ini apabila sudah terjadi penyakit infeksi emerging tersebut, maka dilakukan tata laksana yang optimal serta riset operasional terkait penyakit yang bersangkutan. Webinar kali ini membahas terkait kewaspadaan penyakit NIPAH. Walaupun penyakit NIPAH ini belum masuk ke Indonesia, makanya sekarang kami bekerja sama dengan WHO regional Asia Tenggara. Pembicaranya seluruhnya berasal dari luar dalam hal ini. Karena kasusnya memang belum masuk ke Indonesia sejak kasus pemunculannya di India dan di Bangladesh, ya. Oleh karena itu kita perlu melakukan kewaspadaan bagaimana kita mendeteksi, mencegah sekaligus juga merespon apabila terjadi kasus ini. Nah, di pintu-pintu masuk negara, ya, seperti misalnya di kantor kesehatan pelabuhan, di vaskes primer, ya, kemudian di rumah sakit yang kebetulan pasiennya masuk dari luar negeri. Nah, kita juga bisa mengetahui bagaimana kita bisa mencegah agar kalau misalnya memang akhirnya ada yang masuk ke kita sudah siap menghadapinya. Juga kita mencegah supaya tidak terjadi penularan ke wilayah lain. Ya, wilayah kalau misalnya pun ada di satu wilayah, maka langsung dilakukan karantina untuk regional tersebut sehingga tidak meluas ke daerah yang lain. Pada kesempatan hari ini kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada para narasumber. Thank you for the joining us in our webinar, to all our speakers from WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office. Kami juga mengucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh panitia yang sudah membantu kelancaran acara pada siang hari ini. Mohon maaf bila ada kekurangan pada penyelenggaraan acara ini. Semoga acara ini dapat berlangsung tanpa hambatan sinyal yang berarti. Ya, pada kesempatan hari ini kami memohon kepada Bapak Dirjen maupun Ibu Direktur PKR untuk dapat memberikan sambutannya sehingga nanti acara ini dapat dibuka secara resmi. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Terima kasih Bapak Dirut yang telah memberikan opening speech pada webinar pagi hari ini. Selanjutnya mari kita simak bersama sambutan tentang kewaspadaan terhadap virus NIPAH di Indonesia oleh Dr. Maksi Ren Rondonuwu DHSM Mars, Direktur Jenderal Pencegahan dan Pengendalian Penyakit, yang diwakili oleh Sekretaris Direktur Jenderal P2P Dr. Yudi Pramono Mars. Kami persilahkan. Ya, kami persilahkan Bapak Dr. Yudi untuk maaf, kami persilahkan Pak Dirjen Pelayanan Kesehatan Dr. Azhar Jaya SKM Mars untuk memberikan sambutan.
Ya, baik. Dokter Popini, suara saya terdengar jelas?
Sudah jelas, Pak?
Oke, baik. Ya, yang terhormat Direktur Jenderal P2P atau yang mewakili, Dr. Alvin Kosasi sebagai Direktur Utama Rumah Sakit Sulianti Saroso, international speaker, ya saya baca di sini ada Dr. Edwin C. Salvador from WHO Regional Office for Southeast Asia, Dr. Jonathan Epstein from USA, Dr. Pragya Deyadav, and Dr. Anup Kumar from India, dan Profesor Dr. Tahmina Sirin from Bangladesh, serta Bapak Ibu semua, para narasumber, dan hadirin yang tidak bisa saya sebutkan satu persatu. Pertama-tama, kita sampaikan puji syukur atas kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Tuhan yang Maha Kuasa, karena berkat rahmat dan karunia-Nya, kita semua diberi kesempatan untuk hadir dalam seminar terkait dengan virus NIPAH yang saat ini masih ada di dunia. Di sini Bapak Ibu semua perlu saya tekankan semua bahwa dengan dicabutnya masa pandemi COVID di Indonesia melalui Kepres nomor 17 tahun 2023, ini bukan berarti kita menghentikan kewaspadaan terhadap COVID ataupun penyakit menular yang potensial yang mungkin timbul di masa depan, termasuk juga terkait dengan virus NIPAH. Nah, untuk virus NIPAH sendiri, seperti kita ketahui bersama, ini mulai muncul di Malaysia tahun 1998, tepatnya di daerah Sungai NIPAH Malaysia, yang disebabkan karena perubahan ekosistem akibat penebangan hutan. Maka akibat perubahan ekosistem ini, habitat kelelawar kemudian terganggu, dan kelelawar tersebut kemudian mulai berpindah ke dekat pemukiman manusia. Salah satunya menjadi tempat favoritnya adalah ke dekat-dekat tempat peternakan babi, dan mulai kemudian menginfeksi babi melalui buah yang dijatuhkan ke kandang babi dan dimakan oleh babi tersebut. Sebenarnya kelelawar ini bisa menginfeksi beberapa hewan, Bapak Ibu semua ya, seperti kuda, kambing, kucing, dan lain-lain. Namun infeksi pada babi inilah yang paling berbahaya dan kemudian bisa menginfeksi manusia. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, sejak tahun 1998 hingga saat ini terkait dengan penyakit NIPAH ini telah dilaporkan ada sebanyak 700 kasus pada manusia dengan 407 kematian di 5 negara, yaitu Malaysia, Singapura, India, Bangladesh, dan Filipina. Dan dari 700 kasus tersebut, sebagian besar 48%-nya atau 336 kasus, dan kematiannya sebesar 58,5% atau 238 kematian ini dilaporkan ada di Bangladesh. Oleh sebab itu kita mengundang salah satu narasumber kita dari Bangladesh untuk berbicara kenapa kasus ini banyak sekali di Bangladesh dan kematiannya juga tinggi. Gitu. Dan hingga tanggal 13 Februari 2023 di Bangladesh ini masih tercatat 11 kasus yang ditemukan. 10 kasus konfirmasi dan 1 probable dengan 8 kematian. Berarti CFR-nya 73%, Bapak Ibu semua. Nah, dari 11 kasus yang ditemukan tahun 2023 ini di Bangladesh, ini 10 kasus memiliki riwayat konsumsi terkait dengan getah kurma atau dead palm sap, gitu ya. Dan 1 kasus merupakan kasus kontak erat ya antara dokter yang merawat salah satu kasusnya. Nah, ini akan menarik nanti. Saya berharap apa informasi dari rekan kita di Bangladesh untuk coba memaparkan terkait ini. Bapak Ibu semua yang saya hormati ya, tentu saja di dalam kita menata laksanakan penyakit menular, maka kecepatan melakukan deteksi dan isolasi serta pengobatan pasien merupakan hal yang penting. Di samping itu, hal yang penting yang lain adalah penyebaran luasan informasi yang jelas dan tepat kepada masyarakat apa yang harus dilakukan sehingga tidak semakin meluas. Di sini Bapak Ibu semua, Kementerian Kesehatan, khususnya saya berharap RSPI, Sulianti Saroso sebagai Pusat Penyakit Infeksi Nasional harus bisa bergerak lebih cepat lagi. Tentu saja bersama-sama dengan komponen lain di Kementerian Kesehatan, yaitu Dijen P2P, kemudian juga Biro Komunikasi Publik Kemenkes, untuk segera, pertama, merumuskan bahan kampanye media yang efektif kepada masyarakat dalam berbagai platform. Kedua, memberikan saran langkah-langkah penanganan infeksi dalam berbagai skala, baik untuk skala Dinas Kesehatan Kabupaten, Provinsi, sampai dengan nasional sebagai antisipasi kita. Kalau nanti NIPAH ini merebak luas. Kemarin monkeypox sudah mulai naik ya. Gitu ya. Terus yang ketiga, memperkirakan jumlah kasus yang mungkin timbul ke depannya. Nah, apakah nanti perlu langkah-langkah misalnya seperti vaksinasi? Ya, saya berharap sih tidak perlu. Tapi kalau memang diperkirakan ini ke depan akan terus meningkat, ya tentu kita harus hati-hati. Dan keempat, terakhir, tentu harus melakukan koordinasi dengan berbagai rumah sakit di daerah dengan mengundang asosiasi rumah sakit yang ada. Baik itu ARSI, ARSADA, PERSI, dan lain-lain untuk melakukan sosialisasi langsung mengenai langkah dan persiapan yang harus dilakukan rumah sakit, ya, membuat protapnya, dan lain-lain. Ini saya minta sekali lagi RSPI bisa bergerak lebih aktif lagi dan bisa lebih dalam tanda kutip membina jejaring terkait dengan penanggulangan infeksi di Indonesia. Dan tentu saja saya melihat kemarin RSPI sudah melaksanakan seminar juga terkait dengan monkeypox, hari ini terkait dengan virus NIPAH, dan saya berharap ini dan saya juga melihat ini RSPI sudah mulai berubah ya. Sudah mulai berubah lebih cepat lagi ya, sebagai pusat infeksi nasional memberikan informasi-informasi yang penting kepada masyarakat, kepada rumah sakit, kepada pihak-pihak berkompeten, sehingga kita semua mengerti apa yang harus kita lakukan. Dan saya ngucapin terima kasih ya Dr. Alvin ya, Anda sudah mulai menggiatkan terkait dengan hal ini. Dan sekali lagi saya ucapin terima kasih dan saya minta RSPI ke depannya lebih total football lagi sehingga keberadaannya lebih diterima dan juga lebih dirasakan keberadaannya oleh masyarakat kita. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan dan sekali lagi Bapak Ibu semua, dengan ini saya resmikan seminar terkait dengan penanganan virus NIPAH saya buka dengan resmi. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya kembalikan ke Bung Bini.
Ya, terima kasih Bapak Dirjen atas sambutannya dan pembukaan acaranya. Selanjutnya, mari kita simak sambutan tentang kewaspadaan terhadap virus NIPAH di Indonesia oleh Dr. Maksirin Rondonuwu, DHSM, MAS, sebagai Direktur Jenderal Pencegahan dan Pengendalian Penyakit, yang dalam hal ini diwakili oleh Sekretaris Direktorat Jenderal P2P, Bapak Dr. Yudi Pramono Mars. Waktu kami persilahkan. Kami persilahkan kepada Bapak Sekretaris Direktorat Jenderal P2P, Bapak Dr. Yudi Pramono Mars, untuk memberikan sambutan. Pak Yudi, tolong di-unmute dulu mesinnya.
Baik, makasih Bu Moderator. Mohon maaf tadi baru di-unmute panitia. Ya. Mohon izin mewakili Bapak Dirjen. Kebetulan beliau berhalangan hadir, ada kegiatan yang sama di pagi hari ini. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, salam sehat. Yang kami hormati Bapak Direktur Jenderal Pelayanan Kesehatan, Bapak Dr. Azhar Jaya SKM Mars, Direktur Rumah Sakit Sulianti Saroso, Dr. Alfi Kosasi SPP MAR MKM, WHO Regional Office for Southeast Asia, para narasumber dan para peserta webinar pagi hari ini. Puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa taala karena atas berkah rahmat hidayahnya pagi hari ini kita dapat hadir bertatap muka pada kegiatan yang dilaksanakan oleh RSPI Sulianti Saroso tentang webinar The Emergency of NIPAH Virus Infection 26 Oktober 2023. Apresiasi kami berikan kepada Rumah Sakit Pusat Infeksi Sulianti Saroso yang secara konsisten dan berkelanjutan memberikan kontribusi berharga dalam kewaspadaan penyakit infeksi emerging, salah satunya dengan menyelenggarakan webinar pagi hari ini. Bapak Ibu sekalian yang kami hormati, dalam kurun 2 dekade terakhir, penyakit infeksi emerging terus mengalami peningkatan. Salah satu penyakit infeksi emerging yang menjadi perhatian global saat ini adalah penyakit virus NIPAH. WHO telah memasukkan penyakit virus NIPAH ini sebagai salah satu emerging zoonosis yang dianggap sebagai ancaman kesehatan global, terutama di wilayah Asia Selatan dan Asia Tenggara. Perkiraan tingkat kematian akibat virus ini berkisar antara 40% hingga 75%. Sejak 1999, beberapa negara pernah melaporkan adanya outbreak, diantaranya Malaysia, Singapura, dan Filipina. Sejak 2001, NIPAH ini dilaporkan sporadik di Bangladesh dan India. Pada 12 September 2023 di India, di negara bagian Kerala, melaporkan kembali adanya outbreak dengan 6 konfirmasi dan 2 kematian. Saat ini keberadaan virus NIPAH pada manusia di Indonesia belum banyak diketahui. Namun demikian, antisipasi tetap perlu dilakukan mengingat letak geografis Indonesia, keberadaan reservoir, dan berdasarkan penelitian di beberapa provinsi Indonesia mengungkapkan bahwa virus NIPAH telah teridentifikasi pada reservoir alami, yaitu kelelawar jenis Heteropus spesies. Pada tanggal 29 September 2023, Indonesia telah melakukan penilaian risiko cepat yang melibatkan multisektor. Melalui penilaian risiko tersebut didapatkan bahwa kemungkinan risiko adanya kasus baru penyakit NIPAH virus di Indonesia ini yang ditularkan dari pelaku perjalanan internasional dalam 12 bulan ke depan adalah kecil, dengan dampak yang ditimbulkan adalah kecil. Meskipun demikian, kita tetap perlu melakukan penguatan dalam kewaspadaan dan kesiapsiagaan yang perlu dilakukan. Seperti tadi yang disampaikan oleh Bapak Dirut, ya, penguatan dalam prevent, detect-nya harus kita lakukan penguatan. Pandemi COVID-19 ini mengajarkan kepada kita bahwa setiap negara harus mempunyai kapasitas dalam prevent, detect, dan respon terhadap munculnya berbagai ancaman kejadian kesehatan masyarakat. Kementerian Kesehatan telah melakukan beberapa kesiapsiagaan penyakit virus NIPAH, diantaranya melakukan kolaborasi dan koordinasi dengan multisektor One Health. Kemudian menyusun dan melakukan sosialisasi pedoman pencegahan dan pengendalian penyakit virus NIPAH, penyediaan media KIE dan seminar untuk publik, melaksanakan Joint Risk Assessment dan Rapid Risk Assessment, pengembangan tools pemetaan risiko bagi kabupaten kota, penyiapan kapasitas laboratorium rujukan, penyampaian surat edaran kewaspadaan bagi kantor kesehatan pelabuhan, dinas kesehatan, laboratorium kesehatan masyarakat, rumah sakit, puskesmas, dan vaskes di seluruh Indonesia. Kemudian melakukan pengembangan surveillance sentinel, penyakit infeksi emerging berbasis sindrom di rumah sakit yang melibatkan rumah sakit pengampuan penyakit infeksi emerging. Saat ini RSPE telah ditunjuk sebagai koordinator jejaring pengampuan pelayanan tersebut dan harapannya terus untuk dapat dilakukan pengembangan. Pada kesempatan ini juga saya tekankan bahwa seluruh jajaran kesehatan untuk terus memperkuat kesiapsiagaan penyakit terhadap virus NIPAH. Di antaranya melalui pemantauan perkembangan kasus terutama pada negara-negara yang terjangkit melalui kanal resmi seperti WHO ataupun dari Kemenkes. Kemudian melakukan pencegahan, deteksi, dan respon sesuai pedoman pencegahan dan pengendalian penyakit virus NIPAH tahun 2021, meningkatkan kewaspadaan dini dengan memantau kasus dengan sindrom ili, sari, pneumonia, ataupun ensefalitis yang memiliki faktor risiko atau memantau tren sindrom tersebut dengan memanfaatkan sistem kewaspadaan dan respon. Meningkatkan kemampuan pelayanan rujukan pada rumah sakit jejaring pengampuan pelayanan penyakit infeksi emerging, menyebarluaskan informasi penyakit virus NIPAH kepada masyarakat, petugas kesehatan, dan pihak-pihak lain terkait. Kemudian memperkuat koordinasi dan kolaborasi termasuk penilaian risiko dengan seluruh sektor, baik di pintu masuk maupun wilayah dengan pendekatan One Health. Demikian saya mewakili Pak Dirjen mengucapkan terima kasih kepada panitia dan semua pihak yang telah bekerja keras sehingga terlaksana dan suksesnya acara webinar ini. Semoga webinar ini memberikan manfaat yang luas dan dalam memahami dan mengelola risiko penyakit infeksi, khususnya penyakit virus NIPAH. Demikian, sebelum saya tutup, sebaik pantun, jalan ke pasar membeli buah. Jangan lupa cuci tangan. Jangan lengah terhadap virus NIPAH. Ayo kembali meningkatkan kewaspadaan. Selamat pagi, selamat berproses. Salam sehat Indonesia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Ya, terima kasih kepada Bapak selaku Sekretaris Direktur Jenderal P2P, Bapak Dr. Yudi Pramono Mars. Terima kasih juga untuk pantunnya. Selanjutnya kita akan menyapa Bapak Ibu peserta webinar. Selamat pagi. Semoga tetap semangat untuk mengikuti acara sampai akhir. Mohon izinkan saya juga menyampaikan pantun ya sebelum kita masuk ke dalam acara. Jauh batang dari pelepah, lincah jari dalam menari. Selamat datang di webinar NIPAH. Mari dipelajari cara mencegah dan mendeteksi dini. Ya, mudah-mudahan kita tetap semangat. Nah, sebelum acara inti kita mulai, mari kita berfoto bersama. Ya, yang kami hormati Bapak Dirjen Pelayanan Kesehatan, Bapak Sekretaris Direktur Jenderal P2P, Bapak Direktur Utama. Boleh kita berfoto bersama? Iya, aba-aba. Ya, foto siap. 1, 2, 3. Batch berikutnya 1, 2, 3. Lagi 1, 2, 3. Ya, terima kasih. Sesi foto selesai. Kita akan melihat sebentar profil tentang Rumah Sakit Sulianti Saroso.
RSPI Sulianti Saroso melaksanakan kegiatan akreditasi bersama dengan LAM KPRS secara daring dan luring dengan tujuan guna meningkatkan mutu pelayanan dan keselamatan pasien sesuai dengan standar. RSPI Sulianti Saroso selalu berusaha mengedepankan layanan prima, zona aman, pasien nyaman yang didukung oleh penerapan 5R, ringkas, rapi, rawat, resik, dan rajin. Hari pertama survei dilakukan secara daring pada tanggal 24 Agustus 2023. Pada hari kedua dan ketiga, survei dilakukan secara luring, dan kedatangan tim surveyor disambut hangat oleh Direktur Medik dan Keperawatan, dihadiri langsung oleh Dewan Pengawas, dan acara dibuka secara langsung oleh Direktur Utama RSPI Sulianti Saroso. Telusur lapangan secara luring ke area pelayanan dan fasilitas rumah sakit untuk melihat secara langsung implementasi pelaksanaan standar mutu pelayanan rumah sakit. Simulasi code blue, apar, cuci tangan, dan penggunaan spill kit tidak luput dari penilaian surveyor, sekaligus mempresentasikan profil rumah sakit serta kegiatan peningkatan mutu dan keselamatan pasien. Selama pelaksanaan survei akreditasi, beberapa masukan dan arahan disampaikan oleh ketiga surveyor terhadap hasil telusur dokumen dan implementasi di lapangan segera ditindaklanjuti oleh rumah sakit guna meningkatkan mutu pelayanan dan keselamatan pasien. Direktur Utama RSPI Sulianti Saroso mengapresiasi kerja keras semua karyawan rumah sakit dalam mempersiapkan akreditasi, juga kepada surveyor atas masukan, arahan, dan bimbingannya dengan harapan besar RSPI Sulianti Saroso bisa lulus tingkat paripurna. RSPI Sulianti Saroso melaksanakan kegiatan akreditasi bersama dengan LAMKA PRS secara daring dan luring dengan tujuan guna meningkatkan mutu pelayanan dan keselamatan pasien sesuai dengan standar. RSPI Sulianti Saroso selalu berusaha mengedepankan layanan prima, zona aman, pasien nyaman yang didukung oleh penerapan 5R, ringkas, rapi, rawat, resik, dan rajin. Hari pertama survei dilakukan secara daring pada tanggal 24 Agustus 2023. Pada hari kedua dan ketiga, survei dilakukan secara luring dan kedatangan tim surveyor disambut hangat oleh Direktur Medik dan Keperawatan, dihadiri langsung oleh Dewan Pengawas, dan acara dibuka secara langsung oleh Direktur Utama RSPI Sulianti Saroso. Telusur lapangan secara luring ke area pelayanan dan fasilitas rumah sakit untuk melihat secara langsung implementasi pelaksanaan standar mutu pelayanan rumah sakit. Simulasi outlook, APAR, cuci tangan, dan penggunaan spill kit tidak luput dari penilaian surveyor, sekaligus mempresentasikan profil rumah sakit serta kegiatan peningkatan mutu dan keselamatan pasien. Selama pelaksanaan survei akreditasi, beberapa masukan dan arahan disampaikan oleh ketiga surveyor terhadap hasil telusur dokumen dan implementasi di lapangan segera ditindaklanjuti oleh rumah sakit guna meningkatkan mutu pelayanan dan keselamatan pasien. Direktur Utama RSPI Sulianti Saroso mengapresiasi kerja keras semua karyawan rumah sakit dalam mempersiapkan akreditasi, juga kepada surveyor atas masukan, arahan, dan bimbingannya dengan harapan besar RSPI Sulianti Saroso bisa lulus tingkat paripurna.
Kita tangguh.
Mengapa bila bersedih atau kecewa di saat ini? Beri waktu membangun semangatmu, tenangkan hatimu, kau jaga selalu dirimu. Saat kau mulai berpikir buruk, khawatirkan diri, tepislah itu. Semuanya baik-baik saja. Takkan bersama memulihkan kembali hidupmu. Kuatkanlah jiwamu, yakin katakanlah aku tangguh, aku kuat, ku kan mampu lalui. Karena ku yakin Tuhanku menjagaku selamanya. Hadapi dunia tanpa takut, apapun juga yang menghadangmu. Takkan ada yang dapat mengancammu. Berdirilah teguh, bersama kita bisa. Kuatkanlah
kala kita dihadapkan pada duka dan masalah. Tapi bukan berarti itu tidak bisa diubah. Asalkan jiwa kita tegar dan tidak menyerah. Ayo bangkit dan semangatlah, maka hidupmu akan kembali cerah. Saya Andi F. Noya, salam tangguh.
Kuatkanlah jiwamu, yakin katakanlah aku tangguh, aku kuat, bukan mampu lalui, karena ku yakin Tuhanku menjagaku. Kuatkanlah jiwamu, yakin katakanlah aku tangguh, aku kuat, bukan mampu lalui, karena ku yakin Tuhanku
Telepon aja, biar aja lagu dulu. Acara selanjutnya kami undang kepada moderator di acara inti. Moderator kita juga sangat luar biasa dan juga pernah berkecimpung di institusi yang sama dengan para narasumber kita, yaitu WHO Siaro. Yang pertama kami undang Profesor Dr. Chandra Yoga Aditama, spesialis paru konsultan untuk sesi pertama, dan Dr. Siswanto MPH DTM untuk sesi kedua. Saat ini kita akan masuk ke sesi pertama yang akan dipandu oleh Profesor Dr. Chandra Yoga Aditama, spesialis paru konsultan. Kita akan menyampaikan, kami undang untuk Prof bisa memoderatori atau memandu sesi pertama ini. Sebelumnya kita akan melihat kurikulum vitae dari Profesor Chandra Yoga Aditama, spesialis paru konsultan.
Langsung aja Dr. Mampini kali ya, nggak keluar tuh.
Sebentar,
Langsung aja, gimana? Setuju?
Saya bacakan sebentar, Prof.
Oke, silakan. Yang penting kan pembicaranya, kita kan pengantarnya saja.
Iya. Ya, saya bacakan saja dulu. Bacaannya nanti kasih ke Dr. Ya, Prof. Chandra Yoga Aditama, spesialis paru konsultan. Dibacain aja, Bang. Ya. Ini by WA mana sih?
Saya nggak bisa dengar suaranya Dr. Mampini, nggak tahu partisipan yang lain.
Suara sudah jelas ya, Prof?
Ya, sekarang jelas.
Ya.
Oke, saya bisa mulai?
Ya, Prof. Silahkan, Prof.
Baik. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita mulai acara kita hari ini untuk membicarakan tentang virus NIPAH ini. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, we begin our scientific session for this discussion on the NIPAH virus disease. On the first session, we have three speakers, Dr. Salvador from WHO, and then Dr. Epstein from the Eco Health Alliance, and then the third speaker for the first session will be Dr. Yadav from the ICMR. We will begin with Dr. Edwin Salvador, who will give his introductory remarks in these important topics, of course, and I believe the organizing committee will show us his curriculum vitae, where Dr. Edwin Salvador is a kind of old friend of mine. Doesn't mean that he is old. He is not old. I am old. I'm retired. But Dr. Edwin, I think the last time we met, Dr. Edwin was in Bangladesh while you were still in Bangladesh. I know after that you moved to Korea, DPR Korea, and then now become RED, Regional Emergency Director of WHO Shero. How about the CV, Panitia?
CV.
Dr. Edwin, are you with us already?
Yes, Professor Dr. Aditama, I'm here. And thank you for
Yeah,
your kind words. Indeed, it's been a long time.
Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, Dr. Edwin Salvador is the RED. RED is an abbreviation for Regional Emergency Director. So he is responsible for the all health emergency program in our region of the WHO Regional Office Southeast Asia. So without further ado, Dr. Edwin, floor is yours for the introductory remark of these important topics. Dr. Edwin.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Aditama. Such kind words. And allow me to start by sending our warmest compliments and congratulations to all of you on the occasion of the National Health Day of the Republic of Indonesia. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be here, Professor Dr. Aditama, and to see again also Dr. Shiswanto, who is also one of the moderators. So it's a privilege and a pleasure to collaborate with the National Infectious Disease Center, Sulianti Soroso Hospital, in organizing this regional webinar on the emergence of Nipah virus infection on the occasion of this special day. As we all know, the Nipah virus is an emerging zoonosis that causes acute respiratory disease, severe encephalitis, and death in humans, with a case fatality rate of over 70%. The Nipah virus was first recognized during an outbreak among pig farmers in Malaysia from 1998 to 1999, when the virus spread from pigs to humans. It was subsequently detected in our region in Bangladesh and Indonesia in 2001. Bangladesh and India in 2001. Since then, annual outbreaks have been reported in Bangladesh. Infections have been also identified in the Philippines and sporadic in eastern and southern India. The most recent case in Kerala just this year, after the emergence since 2018. Between 2001 and 2023, a total of 433 cases and 308 deaths, unfortunately, have been reported in the Southeast Asia region, with a case fatality rate of typically ranging from 40 to 75%. The Nipah virus is transmitted in humans either directly by bats through contaminated food with bat excreta, or humans via infected domestic animals. Infected humans can spread the Nipah virus infection to close contact, but sustained human-to-human transmission has not yet been observed. Notably, there are no drugs or vaccines currently licensed against the Nipah virus. While human cases of the Nipah virus disease have to date been reported in only 2 countries of the region, Bangladesh and India, transmission to humans can occur wherever susceptible animals, the presence of the virus, and a pathway for transmission, example from date palm sap, exist. Other member states in the countries in our region have commonly reported the national reservoir, the Thesaurus bats, as we know, and an abundance of domestic animals, including pigs and horses, which have been associated with the human outbreak or are known to be susceptible during the animal livestock. The risk of spillover is further elevated in the region due to the high population density and multiple interfaces for humans, bats, and bats to human contact. WHO considers the Nipah virus and related the Hep Nipah virus a priority group of the high threat pathogens for the entire region. And because of their broad geographical range, the wide range of animal species that can infect, and propensity to regularly spill over to human populations, a high case fatality rate from infection, and a non-availability of specific medical countermeasures. WHO in the Southeast Asia region have been steadfast in providing technical support to the member states in their preparedness and response efforts since its emergence in 2001. This also includes convening international experts for their guidance, support, and knowledge sharing. Countries in the Southeast Asia region have, until now, addressed the Nipah virus prevention and control in the context of outbreaks. Hence, in the aftermath of the 2018 outbreak in Kerala, India, and in light of the emerging public health risk of Nipah in the region, an international expert consultation was organized in 2019 under the guidance of the Regional Director of the Southeast Asia Regional Office. The consultation recommended the development of a regional strategy to guide member states and WHO in preventing and controlling the Nipah virus disease. The experts agreed that the strategy follows a One Health approach for the effective multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary prevention, control, and response, and one that aligns with the regional policy and strategies, proclamations such as the Delhi Declaration in 2019 on emerging preparedness in the Southeast Asia region, the 5-year strategy, regional strategy for strengthening public health preparedness and response for 2019 to 2023, the Asia Pacific Strategy for Emerging Diseases and Public Health Emergencies, or APSED 3. Subsequently, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us that the growing threat from emerging infectious diseases, particularly zoonotic viruses, require the utmost and sustained attention, particularly during the inter-epidemic periods and the coordination between the wildlife, human, and livestock sectors for epidemic preparedness and response. WHO's initiatives in the region have since culminated into regional Nipah virus prevention and control strategy that we are pleased to say will be released in the upcoming regional committee meeting in New Delhi next week. This strategy is one of several WHO initiatives for the Nipah virus prevention control in the region and strengthens systems to prevent and control the Nipah virus, including a standardized operating procedure for laboratory manual, the Nipah virus disease profile to support systemic risk assessment, prevention, and controls at the national level, and policy briefs to enable high-level engagement at the same time. Of course, WHO provides ongoing technical support for risk assessment and disease outbreak response, including laboratory preparedness and response. Given that Nipah virus and the related Hep Nipah virus are emerging zoonotic pathogens associated with a high mortality rate, its prevention and control will require strong and sustained political and financial commitment at the international, national, and regional levels to address the emerging infectious diseases. Therefore, as part of the overall control for preparedness and response for all hazard and specifically the endemic and pandemic-prone high-threat pathogens, WHO in 2022 launched its regional strategic roadmap on health security and health system resilience for emergencies and the regional roadmap for diagnostic preparedness 2023 to 2027. These frameworks call on WHO and the member states to strengthen country health security systems to reduce risk, anticipate, early detection, prevent, and response to all hazards, particularly high-threat infectious diseases such as the Nipah virus. Addressing zoonotic diseases such as Nipah necessarily requires a One Health approach to disease prevention and control. WHO will therefore continue to support member states and to work with the One Health high-level expert panel and the One Health initiatives, as well as the quadripartite to advocate for the multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary One Health approach to Nipah virus infection, prevention, control in the Southeast Asia region as part of the overall high-threat pathogen prevention and control strategy. This webinar is very timely as several of our member states has experienced and continue to be at risk of an outbreak of Nipah virus. It will cover different aspects of the Nipah virus prevention, control, including epidemiology, ecology, surveillance, laboratory diagnosis, and clinical management and invention prevention and control. We are fortunate to have global and regional experts on NIPAH as the spokespersons to this webinar, and we thank the organizing committee for this wonderful occasion for all of us to be together to discuss and share experiences together. Our heartiest congratulations to the organizing team and having prioritized this much needed effort. We wish the NIDC and the Solianto Sorosoro Hospital all the very best for this formative, successful webinar. And on behalf of WHO, we remain as partners to you for all the support that we need. Terima kasih, and back to you, Professor Dr. Aditama.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salvador. So thank you. So there are three things I would just give a short comment. Number one, looks like after 3 years we haven't see Sadel, your white hair is increasing. That's one point. And so look, number two, if you have time, I know you said that next week there will be a regional committee, so I'm sure you will be very busy. All the best for the regional committee. But if you could spare your time, we are very grateful if you could join the discussion at 10:05 Jakarta time. That's number two. And number three, for the all of the panelists as well as participants, I would just like to mention that we already have 1,000 participants. So this is one of the biggest webinar we have because it's 1,000 participants. And Dr. Edwin, I just would like to share with you that last week or 2 weeks ago, the hospital also present a webinar on monkeypox, another disease that take lots of attention this time. So once again, thank you, Dr. Edwin Salvador. So distinguished colleague, ladies and gentlemen, we will go for the next speaker. That is Dr. Dr. Jonathan Epstein. If I can get the short CV of him, please. Oh, so you have a very nice background. It just looks like a mountain somewhere.
From the region.
So Dr. Epstein is the Vice President for Science and Outreach, EcoHealth Alliance USA. So it's EcoHealth, and your background is really in line with that one. So Dr. Epstein will share with us the NIPAH virus epidemiology and ecology, considering the risks of any viruses emergence in the Southeast Asia region of WHO. Dr. Epstein, over to you.
Thank you so much. And let me begin by thanking you and the organizing committee and WHO for inviting me here. It truly is an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to all of you today. And I'm so glad that there is such a large group of esteemed colleagues and collaborators, some of whom are friends out there in the audience and who I've met before. And I'm just delighted to be here. What I'm hoping to do with my time this morning, just by way of introduction, and by the way, thank you, Dr. Salvador, for a fantastic background on Nipah virus, is to speak a little bit about what we know from our studies of the ecology and epidemiology of Nipah virus disease, particularly in the region, and share some insights and perhaps some experiences for how we can think looking forward about strategies for recognizing and controlling spillover and limiting opportunities for outbreaks. And so some of this was mentioned earlier, but I did want to make sure to emphasize really why Nipah and related hantavirus are a priority. And I was very glad that it was mentioned earlier that the broad host range and the host plasticity of this group of viruses is really central to why we remain focused on understanding and being able to control Nipah and related hantaviruses. The fact that they're carried by a diversity of large fruit bats that are present throughout the region, throughout Southeast Asia and South Asia, extending all the way into Australia and the Pacific Islands. This is a large group of bats that are very common and live in very close association with people. And the fact that this virus easily can infect other hosts, including domestic animals as well as people, makes it particularly concerning because of the opportunities it has for spilling over. This is a zoonotic virus, and let me preface this, but we're going to be talking about Nipah virus today a lot, but we should really think of Nipah virus as a complex of viruses, and we should really think about hantaviruses as a group. And there is a lot of genetic variation within the genus hantavirus. And so although we're focused on Nipah and most of our experience is from Nipah virus outbreaks itself, we should recognize that there is a genetic spectrum of related viruses that are circulating in nature, of which we're just learning about the diversity. And in fact, that's one of our challenges, to better understand the diversity. So we should consider that NIPAH is just one example, one virus in a group of viruses that could potentially cause problems when they spill over from bats into people. And this is a group of viruses, and particularly with NIPAH, that has shown the propensity to repeatedly spill over from bat reservoirs into people, either directly or through livestock. And every time that it does jump species, every time that it jumps from its bat reservoir, which is its natural reservoir, either into domestic animals or people, there's opportunity for adaptation, for evolution. And as was mentioned before, epidemiologically, NIPAH has had fairly limited ability to spread from person to person. However, why we're paying attention to it and why it's a priority is that the concern is that there is a variant or a strain of NIPAH virus already existing in nature that might be able to more efficiently spread among people should it be given the opportunity to spill over and emerge. And so that's why we must pay attention to this group of viruses. They are associated with a high case fatality rate, particularly NIPAH virus. We don't have a treatment or vaccine yet, although several vaccine candidates are in various stages of development and trial. So, there is hope on the horizon for a vaccine for NIPAH virus. But the real thing is that there's limited surveillance and health infrastructure in much of the range where NIPAH virus or henipaviruses occur. And that puts us at risk of not noticing when human cases occur or when outbreaks occur. And again, every time there's an outbreak or a cluster of cases, that's an opportunity for perhaps a different strain or variation of NIPAH virus to emerge. And so we do have to be sure we're paying attention across the range where the host and virus exist, because we know so little about the full diversity, genetic diversity of henipaviruses. We're just scratching the surface. We know what we learned from human cases. There's been some surveillance in bats, as you'll hear from myself and also my colleague, Dr. Yadav, about diversity in bats and NIPAH virus in bats. But the truth is we're still learning a lot about what is out there. So I wanted to show you just what I'm talking about in terms of the geographic range of the host. This is a map just of the old world of Africa and the Asia and Australasia region, showing where there's been detection of NIPAH or related viruses in bats. All of these green icons you see are evidence that we have henipaviruses circulating in bats. The shaded regions are the range of different genera of bats. So throughout South and Southeast Asia, we have Pteropus bats. That's a genus of fruit bat for which there are more than 60 species. And then on the African continent, we have pteropodid bats that are related to Pteropus bats, other fruit bats like Rosetus aegyptiacus and Eidolon that have shown that they can carry related henipaviruses. And the truth is there's really just a small slice of geographically where we've seen human cases. As mentioned before, it's Malaysia, Philippines, India, and Bangladesh. And there's evidence in Cameroon of perhaps exposure in hunting communities to henipaviruses. But the truth is, across most of the geography where bats and their associated NIPAH and related viruses occur, we have either haven't seen cases in humans or we just haven't been looking hard enough and haven't detected cases in humans yet. And so there really is quite a lot of opportunity given the human demography, livestock demography, and the extent and range of these different bat species. There's a lot of opportunity for human-bat interaction and for viruses like NIPAH to emerge. So we do have to stay vigilant in our surveillance. So just to share a little bit about what we've learned about the ecology of NIPAH virus, beginning with the original outbreak in Malaysia in 1998, which occurred on a pig farm in northern Malaysia in Ipoh. And this is an image of the index farm, Leong Sing Nam, which at the time in 1998 was the largest pig farm in the country. And indeed, on an industrialized scale, there were more than 30,000 pigs on this farm. But importantly, at the time, it was, as was common, there were fruit orchards on the farm as a secondary source of income. And in this case, the fruit trees were right next to the livestock enclosures. And as you see here, these are mango trees. And so this created what we've now referred to as the wildlife livestock interface, where mango orchards planted next to the pig enclosures were an attractant to these large fruit bats that we now know are the reservoir for Nipah virus. And they would come in and feed on mango. And we know that that Nipah virus is excreted in saliva, urine, and feces of these bats. And so we imagine that as these bats were feeding on mangoes, they were dropping pieces of fruit contaminated with excreta and occasionally Nipah virus right into the pig enclosures when pigs would have free access to come in and eat those pieces of fruit. And then that's how spillover would occur into pigs. And then once Nipah virus made its way into pigs, it was able to amplify. Pigs were susceptible. They generated a lot of virus and developed a respiratory neurologic syndrome. And it was then farmers who were exposed to the aerosols created by the pigs that got exposed to Nipah virus in the Malaysia context. So spillover really was from these fruit bats to pigs. And what we know subsequently is that Nipah virus is actually shed or circulates at fairly low incidence. There are two species of Pteropus bat in Malaysia, Pteropus vampirus, which is common also in Indonesia and throughout peninsular Malaysia and Borneo. That's one of the reservoirs, and Pteropus hypomelanus is another that is more of an island species. And the virus has been isolated from both bats, but it exists at a pretty low rate. So really at any given time, only about 1 to 3% of bats are infected. However, it circulates widely throughout bat populations. And through ecological studies, we know that these bats are so mobile that they really connect across the country as a metapopulation. So the virus is able to maintain itself at fairly low incidence within bat populations because the metapopulation of bats, the colonies that are connected with each other, is so large, it can sustain infection. The Philippines is interesting because the one instance we had of human cases there was also related to domestic animal or livestock infection. And people were exposed through the slaughter and consumption of infected horses. And we know that horses are susceptible to Nipah virus. But I wanted to be sure to mention some of the veterinary aspects of Nipah virus infection, particularly in pigs, because livestock are an important part of surveillance activities and perhaps getting an early bead on Nipah virus spillover from bats. And in the case of pigs, even though they did suffer from pretty severe disease that manifested as a respiratory disease and encephalitis, most pigs actually recovered from infection. So it was a pretty horrible syndrome, but pigs would get through it. Although in the course of their infection, they would generate and aerosolize a lot of virus. But it resulted in abortion storms. It was very contagious among pigs, so it spread quite easily. And so, once recognized, if there's surveillance and testing going on in livestock, this could be an early detection to prevent human cases, which would be exposed to sick pigs. In the Malaysia outbreak, all of the human cases that occurred were the result of exposure to sick pigs. So human-to-human transmission at the time, although it may have occurred on a very limited scale, it wasn't a major feature epidemiologically of that outbreak. It was the movement of infected pigs throughout the country that resulted in people getting infected in different localities through Malaysia. And then we move to South Asia, which is really where most of the Nipah virus spillover activity has been occurring and has been detected more recently, starting in 2001, when it was first recognized both in West Bengal, India, and an outbreak in Siliguri, and also in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh in particular has recognized outbreaks in people almost every year since 2001. In total, there have been more than 320 cases, and the average case fatality rate is about 71%. But in some instances, some clusters, there's 100% mortality. So this really is a serious virus. When it gets into people, it causes a severe encephalitis. And importantly, the clinical manifestation of Nipah virus in Bangladesh and to a large degree in India has been different than what we saw clinically in Malaysia, whereas the cases in Malaysia largely were primarily encephalitis, and there was a little bit of respiratory component, but it was more of a lower respiratory infection. What we see more in cases in Bangladesh is upper respiratory involvement as well as the encephalitis. And we think that that might be part of the reason why there's been more human-to-human transmission, which has been a consistent feature in outbreaks both in Bangladesh and in India. Now, the unfortunate part of having repeated experience of outbreaks in Bangladesh, well, it's unfortunate that there has been repeated experience, but the benefit of that, I should say, is that we're able to recognize patterns and start to understand sources of exposure. And over the course of the last 20 years or so, spillover has almost exclusively occurred through the consumption of raw date palm sap. And this is a cultural tradition of collecting sap from date palm trees by carving the bark off trees and collecting it in a clay pot. And as I'll talk about in a minute, bats have learned to exploit date palm sap as a food resource. And as a result, contamination of date palm sap with bat excreta has led to human infection. And then many of the outbreaks in Bangladesh and in India have then had subsequent human-to-human transmission. The outbreaks in India have primarily been recognized in West Bengal and down south, more recently in Kerala, where there have been 4 outbreaks, the most recent one just in September of this year. Both in West Bengal and Kerala outbreaks, we've seen hospital-based transmission. So it speaks to the importance of infection control once a case is recognized and admitted, because either environmental contamination or just close contact with patients has led to nosocomial transmission. Human-to-human transmission primarily occurs through close contact, droplet spread, and contact with bodily fluids, but it hasn't been seen to spread through aerosolization or over long distance. We know through a lot of the ecological study that Pteropus bats are the major reservoir for Nipah virus across its range. In Malaysia, it was the 2 species I mentioned before. On the Indian subcontinent, there's just 1 species of Pteropus bat, that's Pteropus medius, the Indian flying fox, and it's very common throughout Bangladesh and India, into Pakistan, southern Nepal, and in Sri Lanka. So this is a really common and abundant species that lives quite happily in humanized environments among people, and it's a generalist and feeds on a lot of different types of fruit that people would cultivate. There have been detections of Nipah virus in other species of bats in India, which my colleague Dr. Yadav may report on, but really primarily the major reservoir is Pteropus medius and has been consistently seen as infected with Nipah virus, particularly around human outbreaks. And so a little bit about the ecology of Pteropus medius, and a lot of this is from studies that I've been involved in Bangladesh, looking at how bats interact with people. And so, as I mentioned, this is a very abundant species. A very typical scenario would be a rural village with a cluster of hardwood trees that would have a bat roost in it. These bats roost in trees. They're quite large. They're about 1 kilogram in weight, and they have about a 1.5 meter wingspan. So they're very obvious to people, and they're quite well tolerated for the most part in Bangladesh and in much of India. So they coexist happily with people. They actually prefer fragmented landscapes. So they prefer to live in clusters of trees rather than large intact forests. And that'll be an important point to bring up in a little bit. And they live in close association with people. And when we did a survey, we found that people and Pteropus bats share about 26 varieties of fruit that they both commonly eat. And so these bats will often feed on cultivated fruit trees around human settlements. Now, the importance of date palm sap is that this is a food resource that these bats would not normally ever have access to naturally. In other words, these bats are equipped to bite fruit and extract the juices and eat fleshy fruits, but they're not able to strip the bark off trees. So this is an interesting example of what we call wildlife provisioning, or the act where people are providing a food resource for wildlife, where wildlife learn to exploit that, and it can often result in human-wildlife contact. So in this case, these bats were attracted to the very sweet date palm sap that is now exposed, flowing down the trunk of a tree. You can see from these infrared images that bats will come in and feed on the sap flows overnight, and contaminating the sap with saliva and other excreta, occasionally defecating or urinating into the collecting pots. And again, in the rare instance that a bat might be shedding Nipah virus, it can contaminate a batch of date palm sap. And the sap is collected every morning and sold and consumed fresh. So people get exposed to the virus that way. Once the index case is infected through date palm sap consumption, then human-to-human transmission is what drives the rest of the spread and exposure. So date palm sap has been shown really to be driving spillover in Bangladesh. We've seen that bats carry Nipah virus throughout the country, but we see that there's an most intense cultivation and consumption of date palm sap in the western part of Bangladesh, which has coincided with all the outbreaks really to date. A little bit about the epidemiology. What we've learned over the past 15, 20 years of experience is that the outbreaks are clustered in time. They tend to occur pretty much exclusively in the winter months between November and April, which happens to be when date palm sap is harvested. And there's a spatial clustering in the western part of the country, which has been termed the NIPAH belt, because that's also where much of the date palm sap cultivation occurs. Date palm sap harvesting occurs throughout Bangladesh, but it's most intensive in the west. Date palm sap is really the number one risk factor for infection from bats, but after that, it's contact with a confirmed NIPAH case is the second highest risk for infection. Human-to-human transmission is a common feature of outbreaks, although it's limited. Generally, a few chains of transmission, but R0 is always less than one, and eventually outbreaks will peter out. The largest chain we've seen is about 5 generations, and it tends to be the certain individuals who are more likely to spread Nipah virus than others. What we've seen is that people at the highest risk of transmitting Nipah virus tend to be older males. They tend to be the cases that become fatal, that die from respiratory disease. They have the highest transmission rate. Those who survive Nipah virus infection tend not to be involved in subsequent transmission. So studying Nipah virus in bats has proven to be really important in understanding patterns of spillover into people and being able to answer questions about why we see human outbreaks just in one part of the country or at one time of year. Early on, when we weren't so sure of the pattern that correlated with date palm sap harvesting and cultivation, the question was, could bats spread Nipah virus in other parts of Bangladesh? Why are we just seeing outbreaks in one area? So just to share with you some insights from cross-sectional and longitudinal studies of bats in Bangladesh over about a 6-year period, we compared Nipah virus infection rates inside the Nipah belt area with bats infection rates in other parts of the country. And we didn't find any difference in the incidence of Nipah virus in bats or the seroprevalence for the most part. So no difference between bats inside or outside the Nipah belt. Again, we found a very low incidence. It was rare to find an infected bat. Only about 1 to 3% of bats were shedding virus at the time of sampling. Though serologically, we would see anywhere from 20 to 60% of bats with antibodies against Nipah virus. So that tells us that the virus circulates broadly. And importantly, we did detect Nipah virus being shed by these bats throughout the year. So sometimes in July, sometimes in November. So it wasn't just restricted to winter months in terms of the reservoir shedding. So it really points to the importance of the interface or the route of spillover being present, because bats are capable of shedding virus at any time. And what we learned from a 6-year longitudinal study looking at serology, these are seroprevalence in Pteropus medius adults over a 6-year period, looking every quarter, so 4 times a year. And what we saw that there were significant fluctuations in the proportion of bats that had antibodies to Nipah virus at any given time. This is the same population over a 6-year period. And what I really want to point out with these data is that we saw for the first time there was a rising and waning of IgG antibodies in bats. And much like we talk about with people in COVID, the principle of herd immunity seems to apply in these bats, that there are periods of time where the protective immunity at a population level drops below a protective threshold. And then that bat population is susceptible to an outbreak of Nipah. And it may start shedding virus again due to recrudescence. We believe bats can be persistently infected at low levels, or through the immigration of an infected bat from another colony that sparks an outbreak. In any case, once bats start circulating Nipah virus, when an outbreak is occurring in a particular roost, we see spillover most likely to occur. I should say shedding of Nipah virus into the environment is most likely, and that tended to coincide with some of the human cases we saw around this population. And then after detection of Nipah virus in the bats, subsequent months, we would see a significant increase in the seroprevalence again, where a number of the bats would develop IgG antibodies. And then the overall trend in 6 years was that eventually these populations decrease in their seroprevalence. So immunity wanes in bats is the point. And so we see that there's about a 2-year cycle of outbreaks in bat populations. About every 2 years, the seroprevalence dropped low enough to allow for Nipah virus to kick up and start circulating again in this population. What we learned from looking at the genetics of Nipah virus in Pteropus medius over time and in different locations is that we saw multiple strains of Nipah virus circulating within these bats. We saw both the Bangladesh clade of Nipah virus, that is common feature of the human cases in Bangladesh, circulating in these bats, but we also found the Malaysia clade of Nipah virus circulating in Bangladesh. So both types of Nipah virus that could have different clinical outcomes were present in the country. And these are results that have been seen also in Thailand, where both both Bangladesh and Malaysia strains of Nipah virus have been circulating in the same bat species. And probably the reason for that is that these bats are so mobile that there's a lot of interactivity and connectivity among populations throughout South and Southeast Asia. So it isn't surprising to see commingling of different strains of Nipah virus in one geographic location. Wanted to mention too, we looked at the ecology of roosting of these bats, and one of the most important findings we saw is that Pteropus medius actually prefers to roost in fragmented forests around people rather than in large intact tracts of forest. Now, this is particular to Bangladesh. This may not be true in Indonesia or in Malaysia. Certainly in Malaysia, where there was heavy hunting and persecution of Pteropus bats, they tended to roost deeper in the forest away from people. But in Bangladesh, it was the opposite. We saw bats preferred to be around people. And that, of course, speaks to the importance of deforestation and forest fragmentation, which we know is a major driver of zoonotic disease emergence in general. But with Nipah virus specifically, deforestation may result in increased human-bat contact and Nipah virus spillover. Livestock haven't played a significant role in terms of the epidemiology of Nipah virus in Bangladesh, but we are still looking into their involvement or potential for involvement. In Bangladesh, there aren't large pig farms like we had in Malaysia, but there are these nomadic pig herds that are raised locally and driven from village to village and sold at a small scale. But these free-ranging pigs, when we tested them, about half of them, 45%, had IgG antibodies against Nipah or some related virus. Without a clear history of disease in these pigs, we really conclude that they're probably getting exposed through picking up food off the ground that's contaminated with bat excretia from bats roosting in the trees above. We also found a small percentage of goats and cattle also with antibodies against Nipah virus. So livestock are indeed getting exposed. And subsequently, we learned that farmers will feed dropped fruit to their livestock as a source of nutrition. And dropped fruit that's been bitten and discarded by bats would, of course, be potentially contaminated with bat excretia. So there is a clear potential route of spillover to livestock. And it's important to remember to still pay attention to domestic animals when doing Nipah virus surveillance. So just wrapping up now, as a reminder, what drives Nipah virus spillover? Well, wildlife provisioning has really been an important feature in both the Malaysia and Bangladesh circumstances. We still don't understand how spillover is occurring in Kerala, India. So I'll just stick to what we know about Nipah virus in Bangladesh and Malaysia. But with the pigs, it was cultivated mangoes and fruit orchards that attracted bats away from their normal natural habitat where they might be foraging on figs deeper in the forest, but now preferentially attracted to the abundant supply of mangoes and other cultivated fruit that created opportunity for spillover. And with date palm sap, as I mentioned, that is a human provided food resource for fruit bats in Bangladesh. So livestock production without adequate biosecurity is another significant driver of zoonotic disease emergence in general, and definitely pertains to Nipah virus, where we saw when there was access to livestock by wildlife, particularly in the instance of Malaysia on the index farm, where bats could make contact with pigs indirectly by dropping fruit in there. That resulted in opportunity for pigs to be exposed to a bat virus. Normally, fruit bats would never seek contact with domestic animals or people for that matter. So it's really about biosecurity and having adequate separation between livestock and wildlife. And then there's deforestation and fragmentation. So we do have to be aware that the dynamic process of forest fragmentation and deforestation puts people and wildlife into more frequent and closer contact. And we saw in Bangladesh that the reservoir species for Nipah virus prefers humanized environments and fragmented forest. And I raise this now, particularly as we're talking tonight on National Health Day in Indonesia. One thing that we should keep in mind and pay attention to are the potential ecological impacts in the current move of the capital city, Jakarta, into Kalimantan, where there's going to be a lot of dynamic deforestation, changes in forest patterns. And it's because we know that bats exist on Borneo that carry Nipah virus, we should be mindful of how things are going to change in terms of the introduction of new livestock installations and what the new population dynamics will be as that city grows and expands. Something to keep in mind, and I think we should be paying attention to. And then climate change, and this is something we're still learning a lot about. So far, some of the patterns we've seen in Bangladesh are that spillover events correlate with monthly rainfall. Cooler and drier months are associated with more spillover events. And we've seen from a really excellent study in Australia by Peggy Eby that Hendra virus spillover, Hendra is a related NIPAH virus, spillover to horses has been linked to El Nino events that result in a food shortage for bats, driving bats into closer contact with livestock in more suburban and peri-urban populations. So the kinds of strategies we can employ for Nipah virus spillover prevention, and these are going to be in the WHO strategy that's launched in the near future, is really taking a One Health approach to surveillance, to response, and particularly spillover prevention, understanding the dynamics between the bat reservoirs and people and livestock. And the context will be different in different locations. Different parts of Indonesia might be different from parts of Malaysia or the Philippines, and certainly India and Bangladesh. So we have to think of everything in context, but consider the whole spectrum of wildlife, livestock, and people. I also wanted to emphasize, and I hope that my colleague, Professor Tamina Shirin, will really talk about the benefit of public-private partnerships that have been a feature of Nipah virus surveillance, response, and indeed research in Bangladesh. A really synergistic partnership between research entities that are providing insights from research around Nipah virus and also supporting public health functions like hospital-based surveillance or outbreak response. That's I think a growing more important feature of public health globally in general, but this is something that will really be important for Nipah surveillance, including anthropological studies and community outreach when developing interventions and using culturally, locally appropriate interventions that are feasible to develop policies that really reduce spillover. There's a lot we can do to limit opportunities for spillover, which will have a big protective effect in preventing Nipah virus outbreaks. So I want to thank you so much for your attention, and I really, again, appreciate being here. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you so much, Dr. Epstein, and thank you so much for the last slide of this bed. This bed become, very, very popular in a sense now. We are talking about Nipah. There's also a bed related to COVID-19, and you raised the issue of the not possible, but careful about the Kalimantan ecology and possible of epidemiological impact. So thank you so much, Dr. Epstein. So please bear with us to the discussion time. Distinguished colleague, as some of you asked in the chat, there will be a discussion time on 10:05 to 10:20. So you please prepare your question. You can put it on the chat, or you can raise your hand later on. And now we will be glad we will have Dr. Yadav. He is the scientist F and group leader of an Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, National Institute of Virology, India. If you, for Indonesian colleagues, the ICMR is the prominent research institute in India, have a very long history of success and play a very important role in the public health, not only in India, but also globally. Dr. Yadav will share with us the laboratory diagnosis of Nipah virus infection and the testing strategies. Dr. Yadav, over to you. Dr. Yadav, you are with us?
Yes, thank you so much. And I congratulate Indonesia for celebration of National Health Day. And I send my best wishes to all the healthcare worker and Ministry of Health for continuing their efforts to deal with zoonotic diseases and using the approach of One Health. So as the topic given by WHO and from Indonesia, I should talk on the laboratory diagnosis, which I will come to you very quickly, just adding to the John's presentation, some of the fact which he has left, and he made my life easy because he already briefed a lot about the Nipah and how ecology is impacted in Bangladesh, India, and other countries. So just for the audience information, The first outbreak of NIPAH started in India in 2001, and that time we didn't have any biocontainment facility or any testing for NIPAH, and no one was aware about the NIPAH disease present in India or not. And that actually, NIPAH is a disease which forced us to build a biocontainment facility in India for progressing not only the diagnosis but also research. So we built our, and I would going to talk on quickly on that. So if we talk about the India, we have 6 outbreaks so far reported. The first outbreak was Siliguri, West Bengal in 2001, and which has around a 68% mortality, and that is spread mostly from the hospital to the community healthcare worker, and actually that created a lot of panic in that time. Then second outbreak was in Nadia, again in West Bengal. It was a family cluster, and they got infected. The history could not be confirmed, but there was just some history of consumption of the palm sap. These 2 outbreaks were happening in West Bengal, and we know that how close the Bangladesh-India border is. We were working on NIPAH after the first outbreak, but for our surprise, when we were focusing on in northeastern side, where we were looking at the different geographical area for bat surveillance, the NIPAH outbreak happened in Kerala in 2018. Then again, the case was reported in 2019. And during the peak time of pandemic, when we were struggling with the COVID pandemic, another outbreak happened in Kerala in 21, and the latest outbreak, which everybody knows sitting here in this audience. So if we talk about the NIPAH, how the journey of NIPAH in our country. So if we look at the outbreak time period, in Siliguri, the outbreak happened in the month of Jan to Feb in 2001. In 2007, it happened in April. In Kerala, the 2018 outbreak happened in May, the second one in June, then August, September, and this time again, it is August, September bordering month when the cases happen. So if we talk about different outbreaks, the timeline, which started from 98 from Malaysia, and then Bangladesh, and then India. So the first outbreak we could not identify for a very long time, and CDC US helped us in a diagnosis, and it was confirmed in 2005, and it was declared as a NIPAH outbreak. After that, we could have the capacity in India to detect this outbreak, and 2007 outbreak, though all the infected cases died, but we could not only diagnose, but we could also do the complete genomic sequencing, and the data was presented, which I will come later on. But in Kozhikode, when the outbreak happened, though there was a lot of panic and there was a lot of confusion initially, because we did not do such kind of drill or prepared, but still we could diagnose timely outbreak, and then we can sequence, and on timely we could, during the outbreak period, we could do the bat survey and identify the source of infection. So similar kind of pattern we followed in 19, 21, and 23. So if we talk about in India, the primary source of infection is always bats, either from 2001 or recent outbreaks. And if, as John has talked about different kind of presentation reflected in Malaysia, India, and Bangladesh, in most of the presentation, if we talk about the clinical presentation in India 2001, most of the cases presented with fever, altered sensorium, respiratory symptoms. And that time, as I mentioned, there was no way that we could identify this disease, and took long time. During this outbreak, there was 2 hospitals which actually affected, and we could sequence the genome of some of the cases using a very partial nucleocapsid sequencing, and it was going very close to Bangladesh sequences, which was isolated in 2004. And these actually shown the first time a high-risk disease and need for India to be preparing to deal with such disease. In 2005, we could functionalize our BSL-3 facility, and later on we realized that we need, because in 2011 we have CCHF outbreak confirmed in Gujarat, and that actually required a bigger research approach to use the biocontainment facility, and BSL-4 was built and validated in 2012. And then we are using this facility for different research, and it was used continuously, not only for the NIPAH, CCHF, COVID, Ebola preparedness, and many other high-risk viral pathogens in the past. to deal with, prepare, and also response in the country. The second outbreak in 2007, it caused a death of 5 cases that include 1 hospital contact, 4 family member, and it was a mainly intrafamilial outbreak, which presented with 100% fever and altered sensorium. It was a sporadic outbreak and there was no serum, so we could not test the serum, but the autopsy samples was used for diagnosis and also for the sequencing, and which could lead to understanding that this virus was very close to the strain which is presented in Bangladesh at that time. And this was the first complete data presented from India. After that, there was a strategy made that whenever there is outbreak, how we are going to do quick diagnosis, contact tracing, establishment of on-site field diagnostic, and also the capacity building, augmentation of laboratory testing capacity. And in the meantime, in 2009, after the H1N1 pandemic, Department of Health Research built a laboratory network of medical colleges, which is now 155 in number across the country to augment the laboratory capacity, which they were trained on biosafety, biosecurity aspect to test and handle such kind of sample if any outbreak happen of such a sort. So in 2018, when the outbreak happened, it was again the cases happened, and there were 2 main clusters. There was 16 death, 18 confirmed cases, and there were 5 probable NIPAH cases which could not be diagnosed, and so total number of the cases become 23. Out of these cases, there were 2 cases who recovered, and they were followed for a long time. The cases were presented with altered mental status, seizures, headache, breathlessness, and fever mainly. And in this process, we must appreciate the state government of Kerala, central government, that how closely they monitor the context, and the numbers were more than 1,900 in that time. And this was the first high-risk group of pathogens outbreak in India in recent decades, and we faced a lot of trouble. There was struggling factors that how to do the burial of dead bodies, and people were very scared because of the spread of disease across the region, and the mortuary were full with human remains. Community acceptance and community engagement become very important, which we realized in this outbreak. There was no POC assays that can be used at field side or bedside diagnosis, no defined guideline on management. There was no therapeutic label, and also there was lack of coordination and sensitization among the healthcare worker, lack of PPEs, and there was no isolation facility. So immediately on the spot, the training on dignified rituals and burials were done. The state government and central government together made many guidelines, which is continuously used. And we use the not only WHO's, but also the Bangladesh colleagues already experienced knowledge to make the guidelines, and it is available on the portal of Health Ministry. And also Kerala State developed is very detailed protocol for each process, and which become very helpful in not only COVID pandemic, but also in the NIPAH outbreak. Then the stand-alone NIPAH treatment facility was made, and many teams came together and they started working, that include ICMR, that many institutions of ICMR, they came together, Kerala Public Health, including Kerala Health Minister, Principal Secretary Health, PCCF, Wildlife Kerala, and the private hospitals where the patients were admitted. Everybody tried to do their best to treat the patient, to safeguard the life of the contact cases, and the IDSP network engaged in contact tracing. During this year, when we received the samples from suspected cases, it was confirmed by a PICS laboratory and IV, and then we started trying to do a virus isolation, and we could do a NIPAH virus isolation from one of the infected patients, and that really helped in building indigenous testing system in India, and we also helped many CR member state in later on with this approach. We did not only we could do the isolation of virus, we could completely genome sequencing, and then we could also started working on the tracing the source of infections, and that included doing a bat survey, and also many other things which emerged after the discussion in Delhi with the WHO CRO and many other countries who are affected with NIPAH. They came to Delhi. There was stakeholder meetings, and there was a lot of discussion. And the first and most important discussion point was we should have a point of care which can utilize and deploy in such situation, either for the bats or during the outbreak. And that really helped us understanding the priorities, and we could quickly develop indigenous assays, including the NIPAH human IgG ELISA, IgM ELISA, and also the bat ELISA, swine ELISA. And these all assays were validated with using different clinical samples. And we took these assays to, we also developed a point of care assay with the one of the Indian company here is called Ball Biodiagnostic. And we could take to the Bangladesh, and with the Bangladesh colleague in IDCR, we could validate these assays. This time when NIPAH outbreak happened in 2018, it created a lot of panic. People visited to Kerala. There was army soldiers who were in Kerala. They went back to home, and they had many of they suffered with the ARDS cases. And because of the panic, there was large number of the samples were referred to NIV for testing. And for surprising, they turned to be JE rhinoviruses, parainfluenza adenovirus, Haemophilus influenza, and E. coli. By this mean, what I'm trying to present that in a wake of such kind of outbreak, we also need to be prepared for other disease diagnoses. If it turned to be negative for NIPAH, then what we need to test based on the clinical symptom. Further, there was more panic toward the fruits, because everybody said that the fruits are the main source of infection, and it's a very commonly habit in India to eat the half-eaten, beaten fruits by bats or by birds. And the people started stop not only the transport but also consumption. And it took a lot of social media briefing, IC, to understand that how you can consume the fruit even though if you are suspecting or in the panic for the better. And Kerala produced a large number of the fruits in the season, especially in the season of May to June, July, August. This is a fruit bearing season where we have all tasty and a good quality of fruits available there. So the next outbreak happened in 2019, which included only one case. And this is one of the example of preparedness, that if everybody is in the board and if they are ready to deal with such situation. This was only one case, which was a 21-year male engineering student. He presented with fever, altered sensoria, and it was immediately tested and confirmed for the NIPAH. And then on the site, laboratory were set up by NIV Pune. The clinician were brief. They were aware of how to deal with the patient, what kind of precautionary measures should be taken, and there was no further human transmission. The case survived, and though no further transmission happened. But yes, we did immediately to all locations were visited in last 1 month to see that what could be the source of infection. During this year, in 2019, the Kerala state emphasized to training on the healthcare worker. And there were more than 30,000 healthcare workers trained by trainers by using the TOT method. So initially, and that actually become very, very helpful when the COVID pandemic happened, because they were trained, they were briefed how to handle the patient, what to be done when there is an ambulance carrying to the patient, if there is a dead body, how to do burial. And I think this was very, very important part of this outbreak, that you prepare your forces of healthcare workers to deal with such kind of emergency. So extensive training not only done by for the healthcare worker, but also for the laboratory team members, so that if the samples come, they should not be afraid to test if it is a NIPAH negative or suspected, using the proper PPE and the training. So this training continuously done in Kerala. While the pandemic happened, we know that Kerala was also a most affected state with the Maharashtra, and during the second wave, when the Delta was present in India in a very high number during that time, and in Kerala, almost every if you go in a team member, then many of the people have cough, cold, fever was very commonly present, and because of that, it's very difficult to identify outbreak of high-risk pathogen happening in a pandemic. Is pose more challenges, because you have a lot of already ongoing inhibition and restrictions on the boundary of the states, traveling measures, and between this, if there's outbreak of NIPAH, it create more complexity to challenge for the healthcare worker, for the state government, and also for other people who deal with the patient. And in this time in 2019, August, September, there was 12-year-old boy who presented with fever, altered sensorium, and he died very quickly. And but there was no further transmission, and contactless, and for surprisingly 30% of the cases turned to be COVID positive, affected with the Delta variant that time. So that this is the time when we realized that the point of care, which was developed in 2018, should be given emergency use authorization for use, and it was approved by DCGI Government of India for screening of such cases. Then further, because of the 2019 and also in 21 presentation was mainly AIS. So there was a discussion on how we can improve the testing algorithm, and based on there was a high-level expert committee was called, and there was a discussion that what other diseases should be considered in such kind of scenario, and algorithm was developed, and these algorithms we are constantly changing because NIPAH based on the NIPAH's presentation. And as we also need to consider the endemic diseases that include not only bacterial PCRs, including Haemophilus influenza, meningitis, but also Chandipura, herpes virus, enteroviruses. So many encephalitis-causing diseases were included in the testing. Also NIPAH, TrueNet, and also IgM ELISA in case the cases are presented. There was a guideline which was issued that how we are going to consider the testing of Japanese encephalitis or other diseases when they are coming to presenting with a similar kind of symptoms. This was the only one case, and then further no transmissions happened, and it was a very excellent response from the state and from the ICMR and also the hospital who treated the patients, and they followed very good practices, so no further transmission happened. In all these outbreak of 2018, 19, 21, we did the BAT survey in affected area and also the control area. And in 2018, that was the highest number of the BAT positivity. That was 25% viral RNA positivity was found. In 2019, we found 3 BAT positivity and also NIPAH positivity. In 21, there was no viral RNA positivity, but there was high positivity of IgG antibodies from the sites. As soon as we came to know from the Chief Minister, from the Health Minister of Kerala regarding the suspected cases in NIPAH, there was a deployment quickly done. And this time in the pandemic, and we were planning many years actually, that we should have a mobile BSL-3 facility, which should be placed in an outbreak setting when such kind of fear happened. And we had this facility ready, and we deployed this mobile BSL-3 quickly to the site of Kozhikode where the cases were happening. And if we talk about these cases, so you all know that there was 6 total cases, 2 deaths and 4 survived very quickly. My colleague Dr. Anup is talking later on the hospital aspect, so I'm not going to do much detail. But the message is that there was no further, once people know that this is a NIPAH outbreak and how many of them infected contacts are declared, there were no further transmission. And we have just completed yesterday the double incubation of 42 days. So this is a very good sign that how awareness actually help in such kind of containment of diseases. So if we look at the summary, there was a family cluster which included these cases, and then there was a hospital cluster. So there was a death from the family cluster and 1 death from the hospital cluster, which is marked here in the blue and red. So and surprisingly, this time all the cases were male, and they were all in the early age, and I think that could be one of the reason as well for the recovery of for early recovery of these cases. There was a large number of suspected NIPAH cases contact. They were asked to be stay at home, and they were being followed, tested, and all of them turned to be negative later on. Based on all these experiences, we have now case definition: the patient with acute encephalitis syndrome presenting with one of the following, either with the respiratory involvement defined as presence of tachypnea or lung crackles, or myocarditis defined as the presence of chest pain, bradycardia, tachycardia, and hypertension, or any elevated myocardial enzymes. Patients of AS with history of similar case in the family, clustering, or in the neighborhood, or at the workplace during past 3 weeks. One or more additional clinical criteria may be suggesting of Nipah virus disease and the cases of AS. So we are not talking about the breathlessness, cough, lung, and also tachypnea, myoclonus, autoimmune dysfunction with matter lesion in brain and spinal cord on. So now case definition is covering all probable things which can be presented as a NIPAH, and we are considering probable case with any suspected case or patient who reside in the same village, community ward where suspected case of NIPAH were living during the outbreak, or who died before complete diagnosis could be collected. Also, it involves suspected case patient who came in direct contact with confirmed case patient settled during the outbreak period and who died before complete diagnosis. The confirmed cases involve a suspected or probable case who has a laboratory confirmation of Nipah infection, either by Nipah virus RNA or by PCR from respiratory secretion, urine, cerebrospinal fluid, or by isolation of Nipah virus from respiratory secretion, urine, or cerebrospinal fluid. So these are the sample which we prefer to collect it during such kind of outbreak or investigation, which will be oropharyngeal, nasopharyngeal, urine, serum, whole blood, CSF, and also bronchial alveoli lavage in case of intubation in sterile conditions. This specimen have shown Nipah viral RNA presence is mainly urine, nasopharyngeal, and oropharyngeal swab. So they are the priority sample for the testing, but serum and blood, in case the acute phase is over, then we can also do the serology test to confirm such kind of cases. So what is the challenge in Nipah detection? The first and most important is a high-risk disease. So when you are doing a diagnosis, you should have all the preparedness that include having a proper PP, the biocontainment facility, and the timely detections. And if you are missing any of this, then you should have a very good training to the team that they can handle such kind of sample without fear and panic. And that, because if you are having a fear to handle sampling, there would be chances of making mistake. You can land up of having wrong diagnosis or cross contamination, and these area and in such kind of outbreak, we cannot afford any single miss up in the testing or diagnosis, because that will lead to further complex the situation of outbreak. So currently we are following this diagnostic algorithm where we have requested Kerala state to implement the TrueNet point of care test for Nipah virus in routine testing. And if there is any positivity there, it should be confirmed by real-time PCR. Then if it negative, then it should be ruled out for AS pathogens and also for RI pathogens. But if it is a positive, then further it should be confirmed by NGS and the isolation method. We need to have the biosafety consideration for handling Nipah virus specimen. That should be including, if you are in a situation that you cannot send your sample to a higher containment, so you should at least have the BSL-3 PP that include power air purifying respirator or such kind of PP which assure the safety of individuals and bring the confidence in them to process these sample. The decontaminations area including autoclave must be available. Facility for decontamination of liquid waste needs to be available, and segregate area for each work with the proper laboratory flow, which we all learned during the pandemic, that how we should do a molecular testing for COVID. The most important, if you can inactivate your sample, that also would be best for handling in a BSL-2 area, but that inactivation method has to be proven by laboratory experiment that lysis buffer is sufficient enough to deal with the virus. Then in the field laboratory setup, we generally set up a clean workstation, extractions room and PCR station, and dawning area, doffing area, and proper protocol to be given to the worker who are doing that, how they have to decontaminate the PP after the use, and what kind of precaution they have to do when they are dealing with this. So now I talk about the mobile BSL-3 facility. So this was developed during the pandemic, and it has all the infrastructure which is required in a BSL-3 facility to deal with the waste, liquid waste, solid waste, air decontamination method. We use this mobile BSL-3 before the field deployment in many areas, and we went to many field, and we also used for the bat survey to see that this is working fine in a field setting in a very remote area. And it was also demonstrated in G20 meeting recently for all the CR member states. So this is some of the glimpses of this mobile BSL-3 facility, and this is a glimpse of the people working during the Kerala outbreak for the diagnosis purpose, where multiple people can work inside on this aspect. So now if we talk what is available in the market, so there are some real-time PCR commercially available which you can utilize, and that include the alpha diagnostic and immunodiagnostic. They have this NIPAH, IgM and IgG ELISA. Then point of care is available from MolBio Diagnostic. Then real-time assays are available for BioPrem, LifeTech, and also BioPreferred and Creative diagnosis method. We use the earlier indigenous testing method, which is being validated and confirmed many times, not only for the human, but also for the bat sample testing. So this point of care assay, when we try to validate the beautiful part of that, you get results within 1.5 hour, and it's very easy to inactivate the sample. And this was developed jointly, and it can be just packed in a suitcase. You can carry to any remote areas, and it is a battery operated, so you don't have to worry about the temperature and the electricity and other. So it can be actually, it's a very good tool to be used in the field. And in the COVID, we used TrueNet method for the COVID also, and it helped in enhancing our response during the COVID pandemic. Because of the TB WHO program, the TrueNet method is available across the many countries, and it can be utilized and repurposed for other diseases too. So you can just put the samples in the lysis buffer, put in the cartridge, and quickly you have RNA extraction. Take few microliters, load to the machine, and you can get the PCR results very quickly. We have validated and this data is already published, and it is very equally sensitive and specific as NIPAH real-time PCR. And this assay can be utilized in any field or clinical trial setting as well. The ELISA which we develop here for IgM and IgG ELISA, which is 100% sensitive and 99% specific, and it was also tested for the cross reactivity panel. The in NIPAH IgG, which also is a sensitive 100% specific 99%. All these assays which we develop actually help in different outbreaks and also understanding about the bats. And initially, everybody thought that only Pteropus bats are responsible for NIPAH spread. But in 2020, in one of the sites in Maharashtra, we found that other bat species were also positive for NIPAH. In Kerala, also in 2021, we found the Raucetus bats were positive, along with the Pteropus bats. And in the 2019, we could detect not only the NIPAH viral RNA, but at the same time, you can also get the IgG positivity in these bats. We also did sequencing from bats whenever we found viral RNA positivity, and do the genomic sequencing to understand how much they are close or far from the human cases. And these data, all these data are published and available in the public domain. If we talk about the persistent of antibody in the survival cases and also in the contact, we did a survey in 2018 among the contacts, and we found there was at least 3 cases where they were found asymptomatic positive, and we followed these cases. Asymptomatic cases, antibody did not stay for a very long time, but the NIPAH affected patient have still antibody positivity after 4 years as well. So they have a long lasting antibody once they are infected, and they have a good titer. If we talk about in 2018 and 2019, seroprevalence was done among close contacts.
Dr. Yadav, we still have a couple of minutes for discussion. If you could kindly.
Yes. Thank you. So just the last slide. So we did a genomic characterization of NIPAH virus, and as you can see in this figure, that Indian sequences presented from, especially from the bats and human from Kerala, they are they have some differences with Bangladesh, and but they are aligned with the single node here, which you can see. But there is a clear-cut difference in the Kerala. But the sequences from earlier outbreak of West Bengal in 2001 and 7, they go more closely to the Bangladesh. So this is with this, I would like to just tell that, but this doesn't mean that positivity is only in the Kerala. We also did a countrywide survey, and we found that many states of the country, which is marked in this map, were found positive for IgG antibody, and we are working furthermore. And I would like to thank WHO CRO to steering these NIPAH as a priority disease. And in this process, we are also now focusing on, many countries are focusing on developing vaccine, monoclonals, and I think that will help us in further control of these diseases and reduce the panic. And with this, I would like to thank the ICMR team that include from headquarter and NIV, and also the great work by Kerala, including from health minister to all the state stakeholders and the hospital, doctor, nurses who works tirelessly among all these outbreaks. Thank you very much once again for giving this opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reda. Very comprehensive discussion, presentation on the lab diagnostic aspect. I really appreciate the mobile BSLP that you show. But you know, for Indonesia, we have 17,000 islands, so it's not really automobile. We might need a flight BSL-3. Anyway, so we still have about 15 minutes for discussion. I know the organizing committee already prepared the question. Please put the question on the screen. Okay, while waiting the question, Dr. Edwin, three of you talking about One Health, and we know next week there will be One Health Day. I know you will have regional committee meeting next week, but what is WHO CRO view on this One Health activities in our region?
Thank you so much for that question, Professor. And thank you for the speakers. I mean, it's very enlightening. So as the speakers have alluded to, I believe what we have all realized, and it's quite sad that it took COVID-19 actually to make us all understand that the way for us to really be prepared for any emerging diseases, particularly of zoonotic origin, is to really take up the One Health approach. As the speakers have said, Professor, there's more and more human, animal, and even environmental interface. And for us to truly be able to be prepared to meet these challenges is really to understand the One Health concept. And both regions, actually the Western Pacific region of WHO and the Southeast Asia Pacific region of WHO, has really worked tirelessly since we realized to be more prepared, we have to be more prepared in terms of multi-hazard, including not just natural hazard, but also emerging zoonotic diseases. And so as I alluded to, in the region, we started with coming up with the Delhi Declaration, and then now we're moved into the new strategy for the next 5 years, really looking at the One Health approach as the pillar to looking at being prepared to meet these diseases. So I believe what the regional committee will be able to do is to really to put member states' commitment that we're going to look at being prepared, looking at the One Health approach, particularly when everybody has been talking about the next diseases, disease X, coming from zoonotic origin. So I'll stop there and give it to the other.
Yes, so thank you. Yes, thank you, Dr. Edwin. There's still one more question for you. Where is the slide? Yeah, no, Dr. Edwin, the previous one. Is it there? No, basically the question is a question from lay people. So the question was, how big is NIPAH compared to COVID? And is it really quote unquote a disease or man-made? That is the question. Man-made, or those kind of issue. Can Gabriel clarify about this issue of man-made or laboratory, whatever? Please.
I think the question's on COVID, no?
No, compare. He is comparing
NIPAH
and NIPAH. Are both which one is bigger, and are both or one of them are man-made? Those issues that.
Okay, I think the other speakers can add to that. I really hope that NIPAH will not be as big as COVID, because while we all know that COVID has been quite widespread, I mean, it has been a pandemic globally, the fatality rate is not as high as NIPAH. We all know that the fatality rate of NIPAH is around 40 to 75%. Imagine if we have global outbreak of NIPAH. I mean, we're looking at millions and millions of people who may have a fatal outcome. So I really hope it will not be as large a scale as COVID-19. But then, as both Dr. Epstein and Dr. Yada basically said, it really depends on us how we're going to be able to address NIPAH. Now it's very clear that it's really very much associated with animals, no? Bats, horses, pigs, etc. If we're able to really control the host, then most likely we'll be able to control NIPAH. But if we are not able to continue our studies and research on being able to be prepared better in terms of addressing that human-animal interface, then we may be looking at the risk of the Nipah virus, Nipah diseases getting more bigger and bigger and larger, not just confined to these geographical areas. So the question there, Professor, is that hopefully it will not be as big as the COVID-19, because it will be catastrophic. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So again, all the best for the regional committee meeting next week. So okay.
Thank you.
Do they have the question for Dr. Epstein, please? Yes. Oh, there are okay. So let me read it for you, Dr. Epstein. There are 4 questions. The first one is in English. You can read it. But the first one, what is your suggestion for Indonesia to do to prepare or to be cautious of this Nipah virus? That is question number 1. Question number 2, could you share with us what is the uncertainty factor of the Nipah virus? And number 3, is there any other spillover beside pig and horse? And number 4, it is in English. You can read by yourself. Dr. Epstein, over to you for these 4 questions.
No, these are excellent questions. Thank you for that. I'll start with the first one. I think that there's a lot in terms of what we still need to do on a global scale, but certainly also within Indonesia, is identifying where are the areas where we think there's the most opportunity for spillover. In other words, these bats are fairly widely distributed. And I do want to take a moment to emphasize how important these bats are ecologically. So I never want anyone to have the impression that one solution is to try to get rid of these bats. Fruit bats are essential for supporting rainforest health and as pollinators and seed dispersers. So rather, we have to understand the ways in which we come into contact with them. So where are the large-scale farming installations? What is the biosecurity like? We can do an assessment of biosecurity on farms to see whether there might be opportunity for food to be contaminated by wildlife, whether it's bats or rodents or anything else. That's one thing. There is, I know in some parts, like in Sulawesi, we have seen wildlife markets that bring in Pteropus and related bats into the value chain, into the food chain. And although consuming bats hasn't yet been shown to be a risk factor for Nipah virus infection, it's something that needs to be further studied. What is the risk of contact in the process of hunting these bats and coming into contact with bodily fluids? So we should be doing a little bit more surveillance around wildlife markets to see whether that is a form of contact that presents risk. So these are some things that we can do to improve our understanding of contact with bats and where the risk of spillover occurs. When bats are living happily in the forest, there's very little risk of exposure to the viruses they carry, but it's really around our settlements and farming that we have to pay attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Epstein. So now let's see what the questions raised for Dr. Yadav. Yeah. Okay, but can we go to the Dr. Yadav question first, and then we go back to Dr. Epstein later on? Yes. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. Number 2 and number 3 is in English. You can read it. But the first question: are there a serological data during active phase and convalescent phase which can show what is now the progressivity of the disease? So serological data is during active phase, is different in convalescent phase, etc. That's the first question. The second question: what is the strategy of diagnosis in remote area? We already discussed a little bit about mobile BSL-3. And the third question, regarding the vaccination for Nipah. what is the status now vaccination for NIPAH? Number 3 and 4 is in English, so but you can. So Dr. Yadav, over to you for this 5 question.
Yeah, thank you. Some of them are written in other Indonesian language, but I would so regarding the once the people get infected, as early as they start showing IgM, which is around 5 days or so. But in some cases, they have shown a late. Many people die, so you don't have any antibody data. You can only detect by by molecular assay for any high risk group of pathogens. The molecular test is the priority test, because if we talk about the infection spread, they will only spread if they have active viral RNA productions, and that will happen in acute phase. To understand the science in a better way for the immune responses, we also monitor them for IgM and IgG antibody. So as I showed one slide where we have showed that those cases who survive, they can have IgG antibody as long as 5 years. So we are still monitoring. But if we talk about the IgM, we could only see up to 60 days. That was all. And then there is no further IgM present in the body of cases. And for the bats, Jonathan has given a very detailed presentation on that. So can I see the questions? There were many.
Yeah, while they are showing, there was also a question about vaccination. What is the status of vaccination now? Not this one. Yeah. What is question number 5 in Indonesian language? What is the status of vaccination? Is it going to have available or not?
Yeah, so CEPI has funded many institutes, and there is a lot of efforts now going for the vaccine, but no vaccine is ready to give. But recently, the Oro FOBA has come up with a vaccine. For that, the phase 1 trial has been done, and they are also planning to do a trial in Bangladesh and, if possible, in India. So these efforts are going on. CEPI is also working with India if we can progress in that. We are also trying to do that, but for a disease like NIPAH, where the disease is very acute and people die very quickly, rather vaccine, we should have a vaccine for the contact tracing to the areas where the high risk is there. But we should also have the monoclonal antibody, which can be given immediately to save that. In the past, we could receive the monoclonals from Australia, and though it is not being used, but protocol is in place, and if required, it can be used in India. So we have to work on both the approaches, the vaccine for high risk pathogen for population, but also something to treat the people when they are in acute phase. Then there was a question regarding that if you can treat the lysis buffer, can you don't need biocontainment facility. The problem is you have to assure that how much of the sample should be taken and treated with the lysis buffer, which is a very challenging job, which we discussed in this outbreak also. The sample is always collected by nurse or doctor in the hospital, and how you will make sure that how much sample they take, then they put in the lysis buffer. And in spite of that, because it is in a infected setting, how you will assure that this is completely actually clean and there is no live virus left. You can do the decontamination protocol. So even though if it is not handled in a BSL-3, but BSL-2 facility with all possible parameter, which I said, there should be decontamination protocol, proper PPE. And because in any way, you don't want the spread of NIPAH happening in a laboratory or from the laboratory to the community. So we have to make sure that people are sufficiently trained. They know how to don the PPE, how to dock the PPE. They are thoroughly understand the triple packaging, and also how to ship the samples. There should be a good courier services or people carrying this sample. They should know how to decontaminate in case of spillage. So I think unless we have those approaches, we should not adventure. But if you have, yes, if you know how to do virus mitigation, you can definitely do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yadav. So now it's already 10:30. Our discussion is supposed to stop at 10:20. So we took 10-minute times from the previous session, but because the topic and discussion is very, very important for us, so the organizing committee allow us to get that 10 minutes. There might be some question on the chat. If you could kindly see later on, it will be grateful. But anyway, thank you very much indeed for the discussion today. I just want to conclude with three things. Number one, even though this NIPAH virus disease or other disease is or not yet a public health emergency of international concern. This is still a communicable disease that we should, taking care of. But we don't have to worry too much talking about pandemic like COVID. So we have to balance. This is an important disease, important communicable disease. It is not a pandemic, but don't let it just be like that. So that's my first comment. And second comment, like I asked Dr. Salvador, is the One Health will be very important for us. NIPAH is one of the example. There is a story. There is an animal there, and might be forest as well. So One Health is very important. And the last one I would like, on behalf of the organizing committee, would like to thank Dr. Edwin Salvador, Dr. Epstein, and Dr. Yadav for your very comprehensive presentation. It is very valuable for us in Indonesia. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much for the 1,000 participants that actively participated in this session. So once again, thank you very much. And the organizing committee told me that we'll have a group photo. So please put your camera still on. And then Pompini, you want to take a photo? Siapa tadi WA saya?
Thank you very much.
Dr. Edwin, are you still with
us?
us? Looks like
Thank you
he's
very
preparing
much.
for the next week regional committee meeting.
Yes, thank you, Professor Dr. Chandra Yoga Aditama. So we will take a picture. How about Dr. Edwin? Is it?
Yeah, that's why maybe he is preparing for the regional committee meeting, which is very...
Okay. Please.
Dr. Edwin, if you are still, can you hear me? Please be on the screen for photo. If not, then Dr. Pompini, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Please, Dr. Edwin, could you open the camera so we can take the picture?
Maybe he left already.
Yeah, 1, 3. Okay. Yeah.
There is no 2, 1 and 3.
1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for our honor speaker and Professor Dr. Chandra Yoga Aditama already to assist the session. Professor Dr. Chandra Yoga, we know as a director of postgraduate YRC University, professor in pulmonology and respiratory medicine, Faculty Medicine, University of Indonesia, adjunct professor in the Center for Environment and Population Health, Griffith University of Australia, and director of Communicable Disease, World Health Organization, WHO, Southeast Asia Regional Office, YARO, 2018 until 22, and many more. Thank you so much for Professor Dr. Chandra Yoga. I want to take a moment to thank you for all the speaker, the guest, the honor speaker, and now, Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita masuk kepada sesi kedua. Sesi kedua ini akan dimoderatori oleh Dr. Siswanto, MPH DTM. Bapak Ibu sekalian, mari kita mendengarkan sesi kedua. Waktu kami serahkan kepada Dr. Siswanto, MPH DTM.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pompi. Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, I am very happy to moderate the second session of this very important webinar regarding NIPAH virus infection. Yeah. As already discussed in the first session, NIPAH virus is becoming I think, an important emerging infectious disease that we should take, I would say, a more structured and systematic vigilance on how to prevent, on how to detect, and how to respond for this virus. Yeah. So in the second session, so as we know, I think we 15 minutes a bit late. Yeah. In the second session, we have 65 minutes. Yeah. We have 65 minutes, 50 minutes for two presentation, and 15 minutes for a question and answer session. So for the first speaker, we have Dr. Sarmin Sultana. If not, I mean not mispronounced. Yeah, Dr. Sarmin Sultana. So Dr. Sarmin Sultana is a senior scientific advisor officer in the Department of Virology of the Institute of Epidemiology, Disease Control and Research in Dhaka, Bangladesh. She done a lot of work, especially in NIPAH surveillance. So, Dr. Sultana, you are already on board? Yeah, I believe that Dr. Sultana already on board. So, please, Dr. Sultana, deliver your presentation for 25 minutes. So, and participants, if there is any comment or question, kindly please write down in the chat room, in the chat box room, and then the organizing committee will will manage the question and then will be presented on the screen. Dr. Sultana, please, the floor is yours for 25 minutes presentation. Dr. Sultana, are you already on board?
Yeah, here I am, Dr. Sharmin.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Thank
maybe
you.
my name is not
Yeah.
properly actually mentioned here.
Yeah. So your voice is being heard now. It's okay. Yeah. So
Can you
kindly
hear
please
me now?
your presentation. Yeah. So you have a 25 minutes presentation, but keep on board because at the end of after second presentation we have question and answer session about 15 minutes. So the floor is yours, please.
Okay, so can you see my presentation?
Yes, but
my screen to
yeah,
be shared.
now it's okay now. Yeah, we can see.
So I am Dr. Sharmin Sultana, actually on behalf of my institute director, Professor Dr. Tahmina Shirin. I am with the presentation with the Nipah virus surveillance approach and outbreak response in Bangladesh. So you already mentioned that IDCR is an Institute of Epidemiology, Disease Control and Research. So our main objective is to do the epidemiological surveillance and do the outbreak investigation, research, response, and trading. So we already know from our previous presentation that Dr. John Epstein and Dr. Praga said a lot about the NIPAH ecology, NIPAH diagnostics and other things. So we have experienced for last 18 years in Bangladesh. What we have done previously and we will do next for surveillance. So as we know that Bangladesh is the only country who reported Nipah virus cases each and every year since 2001. Our first case was diagnosed in 2004, whereas we have cases from 2001. The first outbreak was detected in 2004, which was in one district in the northern area of Bangladesh, that is the northwestern part of Bangladesh, and which was identified in 2001. And since then, we have experienced outbreak each and every year. The last outbreak, actually, largest outbreak was in 2004. After that outbreak in 2004, we feel that we need to do a surveillance activity to identify the cases, to control our outbreak to spread from the neighboring areas and reduce reduce the number of cases so that it cannot be spread throughout all the community. As because in 2004 we found that there are transmission of fourth generation transmission from human to human transmission. So our surveillance and outbreak investigation strategy is to control those outbreaks and transmission of the infection. So as we can see these slides that from 2001 to 2020-23, we have so many large outbreaks in 2004, in 2011 and 2014, and the case fatality rate is nearly 71% on an average, but in some cases there are 100% case fatality rate. And I just want to share some experience as I was investigated some of the outbreaks in 2008 and 2019 also, because we have each and every outbreak we have some stories and how can we actually investigate our cases during the outbreak session. In 2008 actually there was an outbreak in Rajbari district. When we went there and we find so many cases, we listed those cases with their signs and symptoms. But we found that one case, a retail seller who came to their home with some plants to sold plants to them, but we cannot find him. So we tried to search him, whether he was sick or not. We came after 2 days outbreak investigation. We came to Dhaka, our capital, to investigate the other possibility to find any other cases. And after 2 days, we noticed that one case was admitted in hospital with different villages with the similar signs and symptoms. So when we investigated those cases, we found that this man was that man that was the retail seller. So he was infected from those villages, but the village was likely apart from those area, and he went to his home and he was sick. So that is the good thing, is that he didn't spread the case to the infection to the others, but he was infected and at last he died. Same thing happened in another district in Manikganj. So one, actually the harvester who harvests the date palm juice in this area, his 3 children died after getting infection from NIPAH after drinking the raw date palm juice. And one children actually from his neighborhood, he drank the juice, nearly his age is 12 years old, and he came to those bullocks to his residing area apart from that village. And after 2 or 3 days, we identified those cases in Dhaka, that is the capital of Bangladesh, and he was admitted in Dhaka Shishu Hospital. And we identified that when we taking history, that this boy was drinking the juice from those date palm juice harvester. So case who drink the juice can spread to the other areas and can go to the other areas and spread the disease to the other people. So the main objective is to do the outbreak investigation, to identify the common source exposure who actually drink the date palm juice from the same source. And sometimes they go other areas and there is chance to spread the disease to the other areas. So we try to identify those cases and isolate them and to treat them immediately so that they can survive and they cannot spread the disease to the others. So this is one picture from 2008, and every year we have this types of history. In 2000, but this is the history that we have some exposure history we found primary source of infection. But we have one history in 2019 that when we informed that we identified a case, we already know that there are 4 people already died, the same signs and symptoms, but we identified the 5th case. So early diagnosis and identification of the cases is important, because if we cannot inform immediately, we cannot actually control the disease. That's why our surveillance is very important. And we are trying to continue our surveillance with the help of the development partners and technical support who give them us the supports. So we are continuing this surveillance in our country. So according, as we are doing surveillance since 2006, we identified 34 districts in Bangladesh here in the left side of the map. All over the country, nearly 32 districts are involved with the Nipah virus infection. Previously, we said that the northwestern part of Bangladesh is the Nipah belt area, as majority of the cases were identified from those areas. And John already mentioned that the bat actually, in the bat we found the antibody all over the country. But cases were actually in Bangladesh, human cases, we found that in the northwestern part of Bangladesh. But recently we found that the cases are not limited to the eastern areas of Bangladesh. So we have 8 administrative division in Bangladesh. Nearly all division is covered except the eastern part, that is the Sylhet division and the Chittagong division. But in Chittagong division, only one district, that is Kumilla, is already involved, already have 2 cases. So no area is actually, we cannot say that is not limited for the Nipah virus infection now. In 2003, we identified 14 cases, and out of 14 cases, 10 cases that in the right side of the map we can see. The 14 cases is not actually the one outbreak. The cases are dispersed in 7 districts in Bangladesh. You can see it in the map. The most cases has come from the Naga and Faridpur district, and other district have one cases. So cases, now the Nipah case, we cannot say this is an outbreak. It was individual cases happening in different areas of Bangladesh. So the surveillance, what we actually do in our surveillance, it is a sentinel-based sentinel surveillance based on the tertiary level medical college hospitals. We recently have actually 8 medical college hospitals. Increase it into another 2 medical college hospitals. So it is 10 medical college hospital in our 8 division, which actually cover all over the country. And we have another 2 passive surveillance areas. Actually, these districts we have the cases, and the previous one 2003, 4, 5. So we put those area as the passive surveillance area. And I will discuss later what is the active surveillance and passive surveillance. And we have another surveillance activity, that is the enhanced surveillance activity. In active surveillance, actually what we do in the active surveillance areas, we have a team surveillance team working there, and we collect, we have a case definition. We have a case definition with the 2 presentation. Actually, John already mentioned that the encephalitis presentation and the pulmonary presentation. For the encephalitis presentation, the case definition is that the acute onset of fever or history of fever, the axillary temperature is more than 38.5 degrees centigrade or 101 degree Fahrenheit, and evidence of acute brain pathology, that is the altered mental status, new onset of fever, or new neurological deficit, other diffuse or localized, or any types of brain involvement. If the patient come with these symptoms within the hospital, our field assistant actually search for these cases, and if he identified, he just communicate with the surveillance physician. Then surveillance physician actually will go to the patient and confirm it as our enrolled cases. And when the case is enrolled, we took consent from the patient. We actually take some information from him and collect samples from the patient. And stored in the liquid nitrogen tank for transport to the central laboratory. And for the pulmonary presentation, the case definition is like that: the patient having the illness less than 7 days duration, and with fever and severe shortness of breath. That means the dyspnea, dyspnea like that, it prevents the patient from walk unassisted at least for 10 steps. that means severe shortness of breath, and the chest radiograph consistent with the diffuse acute respiratory distress syndrome. So patient having these signs of symptoms, when come to the hospital, our field assistant identify them and consult with the service physician, so he can confirm it as our case and collect the samples. So if those patients having this presentation and with an epidemiological link of that, so we just confirm it as a suspected case of NIPAH. So for our surveillance, we make our definition a bit broader so that we can identify the cases. And usually you can see this is our surveillance team and surveillance contact person. In the team, we have one surveillance person from the pediatric units and two surveillance physician from the medicine unit. So every day they went to the ward and they just search for the cases. And the field assistant actually helped them to identify the cases. They are doing the roster duty from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., excluding the government holidays. But if there is any case, so we are already informed that as because the ward in the unit, everybody knows about the surveillance. And our focal person for those surveillance is the head of the departments of the medicine and pediatrics units, and he is actually the contact point for the communication regarding any types of coordination, identification, and any surveillance activity. And our director hospital is the point of contact for coordination. And actually, if there any case is identified, we directly communicate with the director hospital for the further communication and infection prevention control measure taken by the authority and everything. So this is actually flow chart. How can we do the surveillance? I already mentioned that we search for the encephalitis patient as per the surveillance case definition, and when the case meet the case definition, introduction and take consent, and we enroll them as a case and examine the patient for the clinical history of the patient, demographic information for the demographic information, and other histories if there is any. And then we do the sample collection and documentation, and we go for further follow-up of the patient. So when actually this surveillance actually going on, usually we collect samples all over the year for the encephalitis cases, but we do testing from December to March, as we identify due to the cost effectivity and the seasonality of the Nipah virus infection in Bangladesh. We found that in Bangladesh, the Nipah virus infection is related to the consumption of raw date palm juice. So, and the raw date palm juice usually harvested in the winter season. So winter is our active surveillance time. So at that time, so November, actually we start initiation our activity. From December to April, we collect the sample from the patient, and we do go for the testing of the Nipah virus infection. And other than the season, actually we collect samples from those areas after 15 days interval and make a pool and test for the PCR test. But during the season, actually what we do, every 72 hours interval, we collect the samples from the site and test it for Nipah virus, PCR, and IgM, ELISA. Yeah. So, but if there is any suspected case, that means the case definition, when there is epidemiological link, we try to collect the sample to our central laboratory within 24 hours, so that we can identify it, test it. We can test it and identify it as a NIPAH patient or not. If it is NIPAH, then our outbreak investigation team, outbreak investigative activity actually initiated. So for the outbreak investigation, we have a protocol and we have surveillance, national guideline and management prevention control guideline. Actually, in this guideline, our surveillance is totally described. The management, the infection prevention control, everything was described clearly in this guideline, and we try to follow this guideline for total outbreak investigation, infection prevention and control, and everything. So this is actually the picture when the team went to the field and do the outbreak investigation and taking history from the relatives of the patients regarding the exposure history. And I want to show you the pet roost in those areas. Actually, when we went to the outbreak investigation, and we found that there are bats residing in those areas. And we also saw some pictures from the Dr. John's slides also. So these are some pictures taken during the collection of sample and when we do the infrared camera set in this area. So our outbreak investigation actually done with a One Health approach. So in this outbreak investigation, the animal team like Health Alliance also a part of our outbreak investigation team. USCDC give us the technical support, and ICDDRP and one national organization they also give. Actually, we are collaboratively doing this outbreak investigation and surveillance. So it is a comprehensive team. So all the team members went to the field and collect data and information for the outbreak and surveillance. And according to the surveillance, actually, the risk factor which we already have identified, that the consumption of raw date palm juice, which is contaminated by bat, urine, or saliva, and the contact of the NIPAH infected person, actually, the person who come in contact with other cases, and consumption of fermented raw date palm juice. Actually, this is a traditional liquor prepared from the date palm juice. They fermented it and drink. So we have some cases 2011 to 2014 who actually consume use tari. That is, we already know that the half-eaten fruits might be a cause of transmission of infection from bat to human. But in Bangladesh, we try to take history from each and every cases if they have any history of eaten half-eaten fruits, as because it is a common practice everywhere in Bangladesh. But the cases we identified, we don't we cannot identify any cases having history of eaten half-eaten fruits. These are the actually common practice during the winter season when we collect the raw date palm juice like this way. They shave the upper portion of the tree and the juice come drop by drop. And sometimes bat actually come to that areas and they used to lick the juice from the shaved area, or sometimes they drink the juice from the pot. So during this licking and drinking juice from the pot, they usually contaminated the juice. These are the same pictures. The John already mentioned that Dr. John already mentioned that the pteropus bed actually the 1 meter to 1.5 feet. We can spread the wing like that. And the mode of transmission, actually, the risk factor is like that. The person-to-person transmission in Bangladesh happening in several issues. The cases we identified, nearly 29% cases having that person-to-person transmission in Bangladesh. So the source is like that when the patient caregiver sometimes infected, we have the history of having some health care worker infected with the NIPAH virus, and through the objects using by the patient, and during handling of the deceased, also they became infected. So these are some transmission, person-to-person source of person-to-person transmission. So the investigation, what we are doing, Dr. Pragya, you already mentioned that through From the throat swab, we do the PCR testing, and we collect blood from the patient. From those, we identified IgM and IgG antibody from the patient. So if it is very early identification of the cases, we can found by through PCR, and the IgG lasts for more than the PCR. Usually after 5 to 7 days, PCR result we find negative, but IgM then rises. And for IgG, actually, we have some survival cases in Bangladesh from 2001 to 2023. We have nearly more than 80 cases already survived, and we collect sample few intervals, and all are IgG positive, and the IgG is strong positive. So, and we do some sequencing work, not in our institute, at ICD-DRB and USCDC, and already it was uploaded.
Dr. Sultan, the time, please. Yeah, the time. So yeah, time allocation.
Okay, I'm almost at the end of my presentation.
Yeah.
So there are so many papers regarding the findings of this surveillance activity. So recently there was new paper, the Technique of Global Epidemic to the Surveillance in Bangladesh, 2006 to 2021. So in this paper, actually, we give all those surveillance information and our clinical presentation and other everything. So recently we identified one particle transported humoral immunity of Nipah virus infection. That is one mother, actually survival mother, delivered a baby, and we found IgG from that baby. So it is a new finding for us. So for the infection prevention and control, we actually propose to maintain the standard precaution during the patient handling, whatever the signs and symptoms. So patient having the hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and personal protective equipment, and be aware of the needle stick injury and waste management. And the people who are involved with the actually aerosol generating activity like sample collection and sample preparation, they should and come in close contact during management purpose, they should have to wear the N95 mask and gloves. And we developed some communication material for the for our surveillance activity to prevent not to drink the date pump juice in our local languages, and if they want to drink the juice, they should have to boil it before drinking. And also some communication material from our National Bulletin of Public Health. Here we also give in two languages, in Bangla local language and in English, so that the general people can understand the communication transmissibility of the Nipah virus infection in Bangladesh. And we have some activities before the Nipah virus season that our team, that is our enhanced surveillance activity, the team go to the pre-season, that is before December, went to the each and every health complexes, that is the catchment area of these medical colleges, and give them training and about the Nipah case definition and how to handling the cases and everything. And each and every year actually we are doing different all the divisions of Bangladesh. These are some pictures of those. Yeah. So at last, I want to thank to the organizer of this meeting, why as because I can deliver our activity here, and our surveillance team, our central sites, our DGHS for their support to doing the work, and USCTC who actually give us the technical support for the surveillance, and ICD-DRB, our partner organization, who are actually actively doing the service activity in the field, and the Eco Health Alliance giving us the support for the outbreak investigation. And I think that's all from my side. If any question, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sultan. So I think it's very interesting, yeah, because you already presented the cases of NIPAH infection from 2001 until 2023, yeah, with the 339 cases, yeah, and 240 deaths. I think the case fatality is quite high. And then the most important thing is on how you develop surveillance sentinel. Yeah, I mean that's I think as a lesson, then we can use that kind of that kind of practice. Now, Dr. Sultan, kindly please keep on board because I think we need to to answer in the question and answer session. Now we have the second presentation. Yeah, the second presentation is Dr. Anup Kumar. Yeah, Dr. Anup Kumar is the director of critical care medicine, Astar Mim Hospital in Calicut, Kerala, India. So his topics is about NIPAH virus disease, clinical presentation, management, and key consideration for infection prevention and control. Dr. Anup Kumar, I think his work is very much on the NIPAH virus, yeah, and he got a lot of award and appreciation with regard of the NIPAH outbreak in Kerala from 2018 until 2023. So, Dr. Anup Kumar, you have 25 minutes for your presentation, and now time is yours, yeah. Please, yeah.
Thank you so much. Hope I am audible.
Yes, very clear, very clear.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and warm National Health Day wishes for my Indonesian friends as well. So in this session, I'll be mainly concentrating on the clinical presentation and management. So it will be mainly my first-hand experience sharing, like how we detected the NIPAH outbreaks in Kerala. So I was involved in 2018 outbreak and in 23 outbreak as well. So I'll be just going through like how we detected, what were the clinical features, and the further details on that, and how we managed. So coming to the 2018 outbreak, how the incident started. Like it was in May 2018. So like I'm basically a critical care physician working in a closed multidisciplinary ICU. So usually the sick patients we admitted under our department in the multidisciplinary ICU. So this was a 26-year-old man with 3 days history of symptoms. He was mainly having fever, cough, and breathing difficulty, and he was not giving any history of travel. So as he presented to the emergency department, as he is confused with high-grade fever, he was having features of encephalitis. So as a routine protocol, he was shifted for a CT head. And after taking the CT head, he was shifted over multidisciplinary ICU. So his main symptoms were fever, vomiting. Then he had the breathing difficulty, but there was no severe cough at that point of time. And he was having altered sensorium and restlessness. With these features, we were having the suspicion of acute encephalitis syndromes. So this was the initial CT. As you can see, it was showing the features of cerebral edema. There is no much parenchymal lesions per se. So he was shifted to the ICU. So like whenever we have a patient with acute encephalitic syndrome, we proceed with CSF analysis. But as this patient was extremely restless and he was having features of cerebral edema, we couldn't proceed with CSF analysis at that point of time. So his vitals, the main things were he had a severe hypertension, he had tachycardia, and he was hypoxic as well. He was conscious but completely disoriented, restless. There was no obvious focal neurological deficits and no signs of meningeal irritation also. The plantar reflexes were flexors, and he was moving all four limbs as well. In the respiratory and cardiovascular system examination also, it was almost normal. There were no much abnormal findings. So this patient, like as he was having the respiratory distress, encephalopathy, restless, he was intubated and he was mechanically ventilated. he was still having persistent hypertension and tachycardia, along with severe sweating. That also he had segmental sweating. Only some parts of his body was showing the sweat. So while at the same time, when we were taking the detailed history, we came to know that his brother has died almost 2 weeks before in a nearby government medical college with similar symptoms. He also had respiratory distress and features of encephalitis. He got intubated. The CT, the MRI was taken, but because of severe hypoxia and hypotension, he died within a few hours of reaching the hospital. And the routine investigations didn't really reveal anything, and they didn't go for further detailed the throat swab, CSF analysis, nothing. So, but we got a clue that there is a contact or a primary case almost 2 weeks before. So that made us to think about the possibility of an infective etiology with a incubation period of almost 2 weeks. So obviously the initial patient would have infected other people also. So we have specifically asked, is there any other relatives, family members, or neighbors having similar symptoms? So that point of time, we came to know that the fiancé, father, and his aunt, they are also having the fever and the mild respiratory symptoms. But these three people are doing absolutely well in their home. So we requested them to bring these three patients also to the hospital for further evaluation, because if we can accumulate all these cases, it will be easy for us to find what is the exact etiology. So during the same time, we started investigating this patient as well. So at the same time, these patients who were presented to the ED, so they were absolutely normal. I was able to directly communicate to them, take the history, everything. But after a few hours, they also developed features of encephalitis, got confused, and they were also shifted to my ICU. And all these patients, one common feature what we observed is all these patients were having features of severe adrenergic response or a sympathetic oversurge, where these patients were having tachycardia and hypertension. And a few, two of these patients were having a segmental myoclonus. One lady was repeatedly moving her leg. Initially, at that point, we didn't think it is a myoclonus, but later, when we had a detailed analysis, we realized that is a segmental myoclonus. And one patient was having ptosis. So these patients were having these unusual features. So the encephalitis is very common in Kerala and South India. But these clinical features, a patient with encephalitis developing respiratory ARDS or respiratory symptoms, these the clinical features which I've mentioned, and again this clustering, all these are very unusual in these encephalitis, what we usually encounter. And these the two patients were having segmental sweating also. That was also something unusual what we observed in those group of patients. So we formed a multidisciplinary team to evaluate what were the causes. We had a detailed multidisciplinary discussions, including the senior most people from neurology, the internal medicine, and our own critical care colleagues. So we went back and analyzed all these symptoms, especially the encephalitis patients having these symptoms. So this you will be well aware about this old paper in NEJM. So all these features like abnormal pupils, these adrenergic response, segmental myoclonus, then the ptosis, all these features were mentioned before. So these made us to think about the other possibilities. And we took an MRI after giving him the controlled ventilation, anti-cerebral edema measures, seizure prophylaxis, etc. Then after that, we did an MRI. At that time, the MRI was reported normal and the edema was subsiding. So that's why we went ahead with a CSF analysis. So this was the CSF analysis of all those three patients. You can see the count was normal. The protein is almost normal, except for one patient, there is a mild elevation, and sugar was also almost normal. So the CSF were almost normal in all these three patients. But even when looking at the previous data, you can see The CSF can be normal in any NIPAH patients, especially in the early days. That is also possible in other viral encephalitis also. Even having a normal CSF analysis in the initial days will not rule out any viral encephalitis. So putting all these possibilities together, our team has analyzed and found that there is an index patient who died 2 weeks back, and the clustering of the cases are happening. And there are many unusual clinical features of in these encephalitis patients. So these made us to think about some unusual viral syndrome happening. And we decided to evaluate this unusual viral outbreak. And any viral outbreak, when we investigate, we need all the body samples. So that is why we collected urine, blood, throat swab, and CSF, and we have sent these samples to our nearby virology institute, Manipal Institute of Virology. So we sent all these samples, and you can see the NIPAH PCR came positive in throat swab and urine at that point of time. And I had 2 more patients subsequently, and there also you can see the urine was positive, and the throat swab was negative in 2 cases, and the CSF was were negative in all patients. So this again will give us a clue that a negative CSF PCR will not rule out NIPAH. And even if you want to screen for NIPAH, you have to either do a throat swab, as the previous speaker has already mentioned, or you can go for urine PCR as well. But the CSF may not be a good sample, and even if the throat swab is negative, it is possible that you can detect it from urine. So there is a excretion in urine as well. And this is the normal the CBC when we analyze at that point. The many patients had hemoconcentration, a mild thrombocytopenia, normal ESR, and microscopic hematuria and mild proteinuria. But this was not observed this time. And when the patient had this hemoconcentration, we suspected it can be a NIPAH, a dengue encephalitis, and we screened with dengue PCR and dengue NS1 antigen and antibodies which were negative. So these are the possible the CBC picture, like can have a mild thrombocytopenia and hemoconcentration. And again, when we went back and analyzed the MRI, which was reported normal initially, you can see minimal T2 hyperintensities here and here, even in the cerebellum. So these minor T2 hyperintensities with sometimes diffusion restriction are very specific or very suspicious about these NIPAH encephalitis. So when these patients are having the clinical features along with these MRI findings, we have to keep a high index of suspicion. Here in this other reported MRI from the previous case, it is also, you can see this minor T2 hyperintensities in these group of patients. So we had almost 23 cases at that point of time, and with a high mortality, only 2 survived, which I'll come to that later. So that was about the 2018 outbreak. For the first time in South India, we have reported the NIPAH, and we were able to contain it effectively as we have diagnosed it early itself. Then in 2019, again, our Aster Group Hospital only in Cochin, a young boy, an engineering student, was admitted with fever or altered sensorium of 12 days duration. And he had features of cerebellar involvement, and the clinical suspicion of acute encephalitis or cerebellitis were made. And as a routine workup of cerebellitis, they did a CSF analysis, which was normal, but it was sent for a multiplex PCR to a private lab in Bangalore. So in that, the multiplex PCR, it was picked as NIPAH. So it was basically, they did a CSF multiplex PCR from which they were able to pick up, and the patient had the clinical signs of cerebellar involvement. So here also, what you have to keep in mind, if you have an MRI picture, which I've already mentioned, along with the cerebellar signs, again, you have to do a CSF. Along with, definitely at that point, I think we should have done the throat swab and urine, which they were not done at that point. But from the CSF, the multiplex PCR, they could able to pick it up. And they were able to limit it to only 1 case, and there were no hospital spread also happened at that point. Then in 2021, again, the same hospital where I am working now, Aster MIMS in Calicut, we had a 20-year-old child with fever and seizures. He was initially treated in a government hospital, later shifted to our pediatric ICU. The patient had focal seizures and again had typical MRI findings, which I've already mentioned. Along with that, the patient had autonomic dysfunction and sometimes having the adrenergic response also. So this again, this autonomic dysfunction and the sympathetic surge is is a very good clue to clinically pick up such cases. The CSF analysis was done, and it was again picked up from the CSF analysis that it is NIPAH positive. And what has happened in this time? So this time actually in last September, we have one patient coming from a family with fever and cough. The X-ray was showing a segmental a lobar involvement, basically. Three of his family members were also admitted, three kids, one 9-year-old, 5-year-old, and one 8-month-old child. So again, while taking the history, we came to know that the father of these two children were died in a private hospital almost 12 days before, with features of severe ARDS. He was extensively screened for coronavirus, influenza virus, the respiratory syncytial virus, adenovirus, etc. Our routine panel, which all were negative. But he went into multi-organ failure and they couldn't rescue him. So now after almost 10 days, we are having a cluster of cases with mainly respiratory symptoms. Again, as there was the primary case initially, then later on the cluster, we decided to isolate these patients and we sent all these samples. And what we found here was there was an index case 12 days before, and there is a clustering happening, and there are unusual clinical symptoms. What we observed here was the patient who died initially, even though the initial clinical team didn't pick it up that point of time, when we took a detailed history again, that patient had symptoms like slurring of speech, diplopia, etc. And the present child who was admitted with the respiratory symptoms, features of bronchopneumonia, developed features of encephalitis like the seizures, and child got intubated. So again, we had unusual clinical symptoms, and these all patients were near from the previous NIPAH epicenter in 2018. So putting all these things together, we again had a high index of suspicion that it can be NIPAH or some other unusual virus, because it was mainly respiratory symptoms here, and we were able to diagnose that. And regarding the clinical profile of this 2018 outbreak, you can see all the patients were mainly having encephalitis, and some of them were having ARDS picture also, and the pure ARDS were minimal, and few patients were having myocarditis as well. So this was the picture in 2018. And almost all patients were presenting with primary neurological syndrome, and the primary respiratory symptoms were very minimal at that point of time. But this time, mainly the patients were having, they were having the respiratory symptoms. Only 2 patients out of 6 had neurological symptoms along with the respiratories. But almost all patients, all out of 6, all 6 were having mainly the respiratory symptoms. And the incubation period, when we analyzed, it was also almost between, this time also it was somewhere around 10 to 12 days. Even in the 2018 outbreak also, it was somewhere around between 7 to 14 days. So on a rough, even though the up to 21 days of incubation period were reported before, in all our Kerala experience, it was somewhere around 7 to 12 days. And initially, I told in 2018, we have picked up the cases based on clustering unusual clinical features, but we were not able to isolate the cases at that point of time, which is a mistake which we came to know, realize later. In 2019, we picked up the cases based on the cerebellar signs, and it was picked up from a multiplex PCR sent for the evaluation of a cerebellitis. In 2021, it was based on MRI findings and the clinical features of autonomic dysfunction diagnosed based on CSF analysis. But this time again, it was clustering, unusual symptoms, and from their location, we were able to pick it up. So these are the 4 Kerala outbreaks where we were able to diagnose from the second cases itself. 2019 and 21 from the first case itself, the clinical team were able to pick up the cases. So what are the clinical clues as a clinician when you have to suspect? So especially when there is a clustering in encephalitis, we have to definitely think about the possibility of NIPAH. The clinical features like adrenergic response, myocarditis, cardiomyopathy, segmental myoclonus, ptosis, the pupillary asymmetry, etc., should make a high alert among clinicians about the possibility. The brainstem signs, cerebellar signs, myoclonus, along with the MRI findings, you have to always think about the possibility. And this graph is there in the CDC website as well. Like in India, almost all parts and almost all many Southeast Asian countries are there in the Tropus, the group of bats region. So these all countries are prone for the Nipah virus infection. But we'll have to discuss in detail why it is not reported. Is it because we are missing the cases, or is it because there are no outbreaks happening in that cases? Because as you can see, sometimes the cases may be in very few numbers, where it is quite possible that you can miss the cases there. The transmission, which was discussed in detail before, like how the transmission were happening in the initial Malaysian days, then in Bangladesh. But in Kerala, still we don't know. Like even though, as the previous speaker, my friend Dr. Pragya Yadav was already mentioned, we have detected the presence of the Nipah virus in bats. And again, probably it will be from bats to the human beings. But is there any intermediate host, or what is exact mode of transmission happening in Kerala? Still, it is not clear. It's the same with the Bangladesh also. We don't know how the transmission is occurring. So we will have to evaluate in detail. Is it because of any contaminated food substances, or is it because any other mode of contact with the bats which is causing these symptoms? So in 2018, what has happened was one patient was admitted in the local hospital, from where he has spread the infection to almost 10 cases. Then when he was shifted to another medical college, again the spread has happened to another 18 cases. And the secondary cases, again, only 2, that also from hospital. So mainly the hospital-based transmission were happening. And that again emphasizes on the importance of the proper infection control measures in all suspected encephalitis and ARDS cases. But this time, mainly the transmission has happened from the primary case in the hospital setting itself. So he was admitted in the hospital. Then from where almost 5 persons got infected and 1 died, and the initial patients also died. And here the 2 are his family members. One is his son and other is brother-in-law. The 5th was a healthcare worker. Other was again an accidental exposure in the emergency department, and another one was again an exposure in the medical ICU. So again, emphasizing on the importance of proper isolation measures, even when you are not having a proper diagnosis, or even when you are dealing with any encephalitis cases. I'm not going into the details about the treatment. We have many treatment options, but there is no proven antiviral drugs for treatment of Nipah, as you are well aware. There are data of using favipiravir and again ribavirin, etc. And now the evolving data on remdesivir, especially in the animal models, I'm not going into the details about all those papers. But this time we have used the double dose remdesivir, just like in Ebola protocol. But we were not able to continue it for 14 days. Even almost after 5 days, these patients were developing transaminitis, where we had to reduce the dose to 100 milligram once daily. So I've treated one adult patient who are having only mild symptoms, but he had recovered completely. Don't know whether it is because of the mild illness per se, or because of remdesivir he has survived. The child was ventilated. He was given ribavirin because remdesivir will not be having a proper CSF penetration. And again, the child had developed severe bradycardia after starting remdesivir, so we couldn't continue remdesivir. And even though the monoclonal antibody was available, these patients presented late. These monoclonal antibody, the data is only for post-exposure prophylaxis, or for the cases in the early days. After these, the organ failures, everything, etc., settling in, your monoclonal antibody may not work in that situation. So even if you want to use it, you will have to use it in the early days. And there are many other papers on different treatment strategies, but the main the data supports the use of remdesivir, favipiravir, and the ribavirin. So whichever drug is available, you can use that. In adult patients, I think with the available data, remdesivir will be a better option. That also go for higher dose, something like a 200 milligram once daily for 14 days, where you have to monitor renal parameters, liver parameters, and again for cardiac toxicity as well. So the infection prevention, as you are well aware, this is basically a droplet infection. So you need a proper PPE. A mask alone will not protect like in COVID, and you may require a negative pressure isolation room, a proper PPE, etc. Then mask, contact isolation, and hand hygiene for all suspected cases, especially when they are having flu-like symptoms, ARDS, and encephalitis. That is the most important measure in infection prevention. Like you know how to treat and prevent or like isolate when the patient is diagnosed to have NIPAH. But as you can see from our previous experience, the outbreak was happening before, or the transmission was happening before the isolation of the confirmed cases. So whenever you have these flu-like symptoms, ARDS, or encephalitis, you have to use proper contact isolation, mask, and hygiene while handling those patients. And the containment in all these 4 times in Kerala, we were able to involve the health, the state health department initially itself, and the response from the ICMR, NIV Pune, the central government were also excellent. And as mentioned before, the public the awareness and their cooperation was also excellent. And even the 2018 outbreak, you can see in the WHO the page even now about our work in the early detection of NIPAH, which has helped in the containment. So I think the early detection based on the clinical parameters, high index of suspicion, that is the main clue and the most important thing as far as the early containment is concerned. So the main to conclude, an immediate isolation on clinical suspicion of such cases, appropriate personal protection in suspected cases of encephalitis and ARDS is very, very important. And a proper history taking as a clinician is always will give you the clue towards the diagnosis, especially the emerging viral infections. The clustering you should not miss. In India, we have a Chandipura virus and a NIPAH virus, which can cause clustering in encephalitis cases. Then warning clinical features, which I have already mentioned. If the patient is having diplopia, slurring of speech, the altered sensorium, you have to pick up those clinical features from the history. Then always you have to do the throat swab and urine. Even if you are not using doing blood and CSF, you can diagnose it from the throat swab and urine itself. And don't miss the radiological clues. The MRI clue, it is very, very minimal. Even then, a radiologist can report it as a normal, like in our case in 2018. But if you, well, in suspected cases, if you analyze in detail, you can pick up those minor T2 hyperintensities and sometimes the diffusion restriction also. And you can get the cerebellar and brainstem signs as well. So we should make a proper encephalitis surveillance, the protocol like in our country, like Dr. Pragya Yadav has already mentioned, and we have to customize our own CSF panel where NIPAH also should be included in the second level when the initial the viral panels are negative. So if you follow these measures strictly, I think all these Southeast Asian countries, we will be able to pick up the cases early, and if we can pick up the cases, we can prevent the larger outbreaks. So thank you so much. And any questions in this regard, especially our the clinical experience, I'm happy to answer. Over to the moderator. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for your comprehensive presentation with regard the clinical presentation of NIPAH virus infection. So basically, there are 2 presentations: cerebral presentation and respiratory presentation. So it can causing ARDS in it. And the way on how to diagnose also it's very important. So with comprehensive specimen, throat swab, urine, blood, also cerebrospinal fluid. Yeah. And the most interesting is the negative CSF not rule out the infection. I think that's also very important. So the specimen should be complete. Yeah. So thank you for your presentation. Now we move to the question and answer session. So kindly please the organizing committee present on the screen to collect the question from the participant. So there are no question in the chat box. Oh yeah. So there is a question. So there is a question to Dr. Sultan. Yeah. So the last one is in English, but number 1, 2, 3 is in Bahasa. So I try to translate into English. So the first question, in the NIPAH infection cases in Bangladesh, which one is is it in the pulmonary presentation or in the cerebral presentation? So the question is, the presentation is which one is more on the pneumonia or on encephalitis? So kindly please to explain the NIPAH infection in Bangladesh. The second question is in NIPAH surveillance that is done in Bangladesh. In cases there is not quite clear in terms of on how to link it with the causes in terms of epidemiology. So what is actually the causes? What is the causes of the infection? Is it directly from the animal, for example, or it is from the environment, something like that? And the third, with the case fatality rate is very high, I think maybe around 60% is not mistaken. And then why this is there is a late presentation to the hospital, and why is this very? The cases is to be in severe cases to the hospital, and then the mortality is become high. So why the mortality is become high? And because of the late hospital presentation in term of hospitalization. And number 4, I think you can read it because already in English. So please, Dr. Sultan.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. Actually, first question is that the presentation of Nipah virus cases in Bangladesh, for which one is more in pulmonary encephalitis cases. Actually, we have both of the cases, pulmonary encephalitis, but recently we found that the encephalitis cases are more than the pulmonary cases. But people usually develop, when the encephalitis cases, people usually develop the pulmonary presentation also. And second case is the linkage. How do we identify the linkage between the cases with the date pump juice? Actually, during the outbreak investigation, and we have several research work, two types of investigation was done side by side. One is the human health area, and another is the animal health area. So during the human health collecting the exposure history, we found that the majority of the cases have the same source of exposure, that all of them drink the raw date pump juice. And we have the animal team who usually collect samples from the pet roost area and the tree where they actually collect the date pump juice, and they give some plastic in below the tree, collect the bat urine, and identify the NIPAH virus from those bat urine. So, and we already set the infrared camera with those trees, and the camera collect this pictures, so many pictures from those trees, that bat actually come to those plant and drinking the juice from this area. So we found the linkage those areas, and we do the case control study also among the cases and take the controls, and we identified that the date palm juice is a risk factor for the Nipah virus infection, which is contaminated by the pet. And the case fatality rate is actually why high in Bangladesh and why it's late presentation in the hospital, because people actually who develop the encephalitis admitted in the hospital. But during for the Nipah virus, you know, the early prodromal symptom is like that fever and vomiting and headache, and it is the common symptoms for the other disease also. So people having those symptoms, they usually go to the local community doctor or community healer or traditional healer for the treatment. When they are not recovering from those areas, then they come to the primary healthcare center. And when the primary healthcare center found that they have the exposure history and like these symptoms, they refer the cases to the tertiary level hospitals. So by them in this period, there are some period actually gap. So it is a gap between the onset of illness and the identification of the cases. So that's why when people develop encephalitis, they come to the hospital and we identify those cases. So it is true that if we have the community surveillance or community identification procedure, that will be helpful to identify the early case detection. But actually, it is a huge procedure. We cannot do this community identification of the cases. Actually, as it is related to the only the date palm juice consumption, so it is not. It is a regular activity. People usually take they are from their backyard or some in any fair they drink date palm juices. That is one factor. And the last question, actually, I'm trying. I cannot see in my chat box. Can you help to by reading this question?
Yeah, number 4. What are the factors that cause the number of cases and the number of death in Bangladesh for Nipah is quite high? Yeah, because maybe the participant see that, you know, the cases from 2001 until 2023 is 339. Yeah, maybe from the it is from the participant view is high. Quite high.
We have already detected 339 cases for last 18 years, and death is 241. That is 71% mortality. There may be might be so many reasons. Number one, they admitted late in the hospitals. Number two, actually, if we give them the ICU facilities in our hospitals, might be helpful for the treatment, but in all our hospitals we cannot give them the ICU facilities, and in the ICU facilities we don't have the isolation for those cases. That is one of the limitations for us. And number three is that when people actually know this is a case of Nipah, so people are very afraid of those. Some actually the caregiver, also the treatment management and other caregiving is not given to the patient properly. Maybe that is another cause of the high mortality in Bangladesh.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sultan. So I think, I mean, with regard of Indonesian context, in Indonesia, especially in the rural area or also in eastern part of Indonesia, there is a common practice to drink the raw palm juice. In bahasa we call minum legen. Raw palm juice we call it legen. Legen means sweet. So I think I mean should be careful if I mean one of the transmission because of drinking the raw palm juice. I think that's a good point. I mean for us to mitigate the infection. But I think I mean in the most important thing is One Health approach. I think because we try to how to manage the wild bed, also the spillover from the mammal that on how we mitigate this kind of infection. Okay, thank you, Dr. Sultan, for your explanation. So we move to Dr. Anup Kumar. I think all is number 1, 2, 3 is in English. Dr. Kumar, could you see the question? So kindly please you answer the question, and then if you move to the number 4 and 5 and 6, I will translate in Bahasa. In English from Bahasa to English. So kindly please.
About the PCR negative cases, I've already told. It's possible you can have a CS of PCR negative cases, but you should not end investigating with a CS of PCR negative report. You should definitely go ahead with throat swab and urine also in that case. Then neurological symptoms. Patient with neurological symptoms and CSF findings, we didn't find any correlation. I've told you last in my presentation itself. Even if the patient is having a neurologic symptoms, it is quite possible that you can have a CSF negativity, and you don't need a CSF diagnosis even when the patient is having acute encephalitis syndromes. A respiratory panel will be enough in that case as well. The second one, can you translate, please?
The second one, the question is why, in NIPAH infection, we should also check the possibility of dengue infection. Maybe we should check, we should check the dengue infection,
Really sorry, like if you got such a message from my talk. What I was trying to convey was, whenever a patient is having a fever with altered sensorium, along with hemoconcentration and thrombocytopenia, the first possibility should be always dengue. That doesn't mean that all NIPAH cases we have to go with the dengue evaluation. But when you have these clinical suspicion and having these lab features of like transaminitis, then hemoconcentration, along with thrombocytopenia, obviously you have to check for dengue also. And even the MRI pictures also sometimes can almost mimic and dengue encephalitis, and vice versa as well. So that part you should be very clear, and you should exclude dengue in such situations alone.
So
regarding
I think
the morbidity and the mortality, like almost all patients who we lost in 2018, then later in 19, one patient, and 2 patients in 23. They were not having any significant comorbidities. They were young, healthy adults without any comorbidities. So we don't have any data so far, especially the Kerala data, to compare the mortality between the persons with comorbidities and without comorbidities. And again, majority of patients in our cohort were young patients, whether something like antibody enhancement syndrome, whether any such phenomenon is there in NIPAH, we will have to definitely evaluate such situations. And another point which I missed is especially the myocarditis part. So we have done autopsy in one patient in 2018. The clinically the patient had the trop leak. The patient had the LV dysfunction in 2D echo, but during the autopsy, the myocardium were absolutely normal. That is again giving a clue that it may be something like a stress cardiomyopathy induced by these adrenergic surge. So that again give a clue, like whenever there is a adrenergic response, beta blockade may help to reduce the chance of developing stress cardiomyopathy in such situations.
So
comparing the X-ray picture in COVID and NIPAH, this time we had only one patient with the X-ray abnormality. The patient was basically having a nobar pneumonia, something like a strep pneumonia like picture. And especially in COVID, we will be having diffuse bilateral infiltrates, and in all viral pneumonias also we will be having that. Unfortunately, we are not having any CT thorax picture so far to see like what will be the exact lung involvement in a CT picture. I don't know whether any other published reports about the CT thorax in NIPAH ARDS. I've not seen any data so far. The fifth one, can you please translate?
Yeah. So the fifth one, the question is for respiratory problem in NIPAH infection, is it caused by the muscle of diaphragm that is weak, or because of ERDS, something like that?
To the patient.
I'm not quite sure actually with this question. So the question, because you're in your
I
presentation.
think all the patients with NIPAH will not develop severe ARDS like in our cases this time.
Yeah.
They even develop flu-like symptoms. Sometimes only they will develop lobar pneumonia, and they can even go for severe ARDS also. So even death because of severe ARDS also reported in 2018. We had one patient without any encephalitis died because of severe hypoxia and severe ARDS. So that is also possible. So always keep in mind, it is it may not always produce severe ARDS. It can even present like a flu-like symptoms with dry cough, high-grade fever, shivering, etc. So that is why we can miss so many cases. Like if the patients are developing only flu-like symptoms, nobody is going to check for NIPAH. So especially in those group of cases also, when there is a clustering and when your routine screening for the common viruses like influenza, RSV, adeno, or like your COVID viruses, you should definitely think about other possibilities like NIPAH also.
Yeah. And the last question, number 6. So the question is, which one is better, early intubation or late intubation, if we are facing with the ERDS, something like that. We are facing with respiratory problem.
I think this was the question which we were trying to answer during the COVID outbreak also. So our take will be intubation at an appropriate time will be the best option rather than delaying it too much or going too early. So if the patient is having other initially even after trying NIV, if the patient is having persistent hypoxemia or your oxygen requirement is high, or if the patient is having severe tachypnea, which can produce a self-inflicted leg injury, in those situations we have to go ahead with intubation. So there is no nothing like early intubation or late intubation. You have to do it at an appropriate time.
There is another question, number 7. If the patient is taken care in ICU, and then the patient is revived, actually, what is the therapeutic for antiviral? Also, whether this is because of antiviral or whether because this is because of monoclonal antibody, something like that. I mean, with what? Yeah. Which one the best, antiviral or monoclonal antibody? Yeah.
I've already explained that before, like the antiviral can be used in all the phases of infection, but monoclonal antibody only during the early phase of infection, but during the late phase, it may not be helpful. So along with the antiviral, the proper supportive and the intensive care is the main thing in bringing the patient out to their life. Or you are reducing the to reduce the mortality, you should have proper intensive care support where you should give the routine organ supportive measures and other supportive measures like in any other viral pneumonia. So I don't think it is any antiviral drug which is making any change or which has made any change in reducing the mortality in Kerala this time. It is basically the early detection and the proper care from the early days itself that will definitely reduce the mortality.
Okay. So basically support is very important. Yeah. Okay. Because it's like COVID, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. And then, yeah, I think it's finished. Yeah. The question to Dr. Kumar. All the question is already finished for organizing committee. Okay. If there is no other question, so I think in the interest of time, yeah. So we come to the end of the second session. If I am allowed to conclude, so the first one is that's the surveillance to mitigate of NIPAH virus infection. So through One Health approach is very important, yeah. And then we should develop the sentinel surveillance sentinel like that is already done in Bangladesh. Also, that's very important because by implementing surveillance sentinel, then we can make early intervention and mitigate the infection through One Health approach. And second, that clinical manifestation for the NIPAH virus infection basically is there is two kind. The first is cerebral presentation with encephalitis, and then the second is with the pulmonary presentation, and then can end with the ERDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and the important therapeutic is basically is support system, and then early detection is very important. Early detection is very important. So that's the conclusion for the second session, and thank you, Dr. Sultan, Dr. Kumar, for your very complete and comprehensive presentation, and then make a lot of insight for Indonesian doctor, especially for also for for clinician and also for public health practitioner. And then the time back to the moderator, Dr. Pompi, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Siswanto, as a moderator. Thank you so much for the guest speaker, Dr. Suta and Dr. Anop Kumar. Please take a picture before we continue the session.
Oh yeah. Please,
Yes, please.
The speaker, Dr. Sultan and Dr. Kumar, please show your video in the screen. Yeah.
Okay, one, 2, and 3. Yes, thank you so much. I want to take a moment to thank you for all the speaker. The presentation is well received by the audience, and thank you for the support from the management so we can deliver this event smoothly. Thank you, internal team, for your incredible effort and also the attendance. We would like to hear out from you. Your opinion is important to us. Bapak Ibu peserta webinar, terima kasih untuk partisipasinya. Kiranya melalui webinar ini kita menjadi lebih mengenal tentang NIPAH dan siap untuk melakukan antisipasi ketika memang terjadi NIPAH di tempat kita. Saat ini mari kita tampilkan atau kita lihat hasil karya dari Civitas Hospitalia berupa lagu Aku Tangguh. Akhir kata, saya ucapkan, saya Dr. Pompini mewakili segenap panitia yang bertugas menyampaikan permohonan maaf atas salah kata dan perbuatan yang ada atau yang berlangsung selama webinar ini. Sampai jumpa di webinar Rumah Sakit Pusat Infeksi Sulianti Saroso yang akan datang.
Ya, terima kasih.
Thank you.
Ya, thumb up. Terima kasih, Dr. Pompi. Terima kasih semuanya. Izinkan saya live. Ya.
Terima kasih, Dr. Siswanto.
Kita tangguh.
Kita tangguh. Bila bersedih atau kecewa di saat ini, beri waktu membangun semangatmu, tenangkan hatimu, kau jaga selalu dirimu. Saat kau
pada duka dan masalah. Tapi bukan berarti itu tidak bisa diubah. Asalkan jiwa kita tegar dan tidak menyerah. Ayo bangkit dan semangatlah, maka hidupmu akan kembali cerah. Saya Andi F. Noya, salam tangguh.
Kuatkanlah jiwamu, yakin katakanlah, aku tangguh, aku kuat, bukan mampu lalui, karena ku yakin Tuhanku menjagaku. Kuatkanlah jiwamu, yakin katakanlah, aku tangguh, aku kuat, bukan mampu lalui, karena ku yakin Tuhanku menjagaku selamanya. Selamat kita bisa.